From the stalactite drips drops and do not fly down. They fall to the ground. A sharp sound, and someone fell to their knees. A man in a raincoat asks if he is okay and asks for patience. Adventurers go to some dungeon, and the covered man helps the wounded man, supporting it. Then he accidentally drops it, and he falls to the ground. Someone says that he lost consciousness again. What is he already on the bill? After what? The robed men are trying to pick it up. The booby-trapped man says that at this rate, the healer won't have any mana left. And another thing says that it means that they will die like this. And the guy who just got up tells him not to talk because they have the hope of the Empire. Then they start to smile. After all, the hero Burn is with them, showing a white-haired man in huge armor, with a giant sword. He smiles and turns to them, and says that if he didn't have the energy to talk so much, then it's not so bad. Speaking of making them last a little longer, and they tell him to do his best. They didn't start to worry. At first, 74 of us participated in the raid, showing a lot of destroyed weapons. And now they are followed by only 43, after which he gritted his teeth. And I think that the main thing is not that they lost 31 people. He clenches his fists, thinking about that. Hearts are still beating at $43, despite the fact that everyone gave their best, remembering how they fought against the giants. Monster colors. He wrapped his vines around them and killed them, and the hero Burn attacked him at that moment. Many soldiers were caught. They just couldn't protect their comrades, that's all. They were prepared for this, weren't they? After all, we are in one of the 7 dungeons of great evil. Is he looking up? And some light appears in the entire dark dungeon, in the core of antiquity. Then they call out to him and tell him to look at it, and one of the knights points. He is surprised by this, and they see a huge gate. He says to himself that they have finally reached the end of the ancient core. After that, a light shines from there and they start to enter. After all, this is their final goal. Adventures after countless sacrifices. A place where an unimaginable amount of treasure is stored. Gold chests of weapons, jewelry, perhaps even along with 36 masterpieces, the greatest works created by mankind. The boss also lives here, showing his throne with golden rays. Hero Burn takes his sword in his hands and starts shouting to go forward. He tells everyone to fall back in position and let the tanks and swordsmen move forward, and then lighten up the area and provide visibility. Then everything starts to shake, and Magic is very surprised by it. The noise stopped abruptly, and everyone started to think. One of them says that he will try to increase the viewing range and let everyone be on the alert, creating glowing balls by shooting them towards the sky. And they watch as everything around them starts to glow. They open abruptly, and someone's eyes are a black shade of gold. Hero Burn takes up his sword and stands in position. He is very surprised and watches. Like huge fangs of all blood, they descend to it. They're all under a lot of pressure, and he's yelling at them to run. He can't be killed. That is, during your sleep, a bunch of people came, but despite your fatigue, you fought them with dignity. This was all said by a certain skeleton. And this creature says that he understood correctly, and the latter agrees with him. And against him were people and his own body. After that, he is proud of it and starts to worry, telling Patrick to calm down. The same skeleton begins to get angry and talk about when he will be able to calm down after such an escapade. He points at him and says that he's the boss of the dungeon and was sleeping until the humans came around the corner. And all that they had the sense to yawn in front of him think, and so it should be. He has no banal discipline, and he keeps shouting that he has no discipline. After that, he turns to another creature and talks about what he thinks. So Bow Down to him says that she doesn't even know. Spots stun people with just a yawn. She grabs her cheeks with her hands and smiles very much. It is said that she is once again impressed by his majesty. He starts to get angry at this, looking at how she is, absorbed and admiring. And he thinks to himself that for the time being, he should have put up with it and left the bench. Speaking of which, this dungeon is over. And he says that he cannot worry, because his head will explode. One of the 7 dungeons of great evil that humanity does not hope to conquer is the core of antiquity. Most dungeon raids end with a human victory, showing it on historical scrolls. The way the main man stands near the core, all the other wars are near him. They are protected by magic, archers, covering. It's like the monster positions that were always supposed to block people, showing them on horseback going up against them with spears, capable of attacking at any moment completely unfairly, showing how to kill a monster with your weapon. In the end, it's the dungeon that gets weaker as the war continues. However, in a world where countless dungeons are spawned, it is quite natural that an exception exists. Those dungeons that humanity can't conquer, showing how numerous raids were carried out, but never achieved success. The Dungeon of Great Evil, or rather the 7th Dungeon of Great Evil, showing huge creatures, and very scary, considered too much for humanity with a lot of skeletons and monsters. Among the 7 known ones is the Dungeon of Great Evil. The core of Antiquity is a complex demonic dungeon. It is home to dozens of alien creatures guarding the dungeon, and gatekeepers fighting 3 intersections. A homunculus guarding the red road on the left, the maid with Renee's blade, a skeleton guarding the blue road in the center, Death Knight Patrick. Exact information about the polluted road on the right is still unknown. Unidentified tentacles, and all this is an impregnable fortress at the Dominion, showing how a large number of people have reached the end of the temple, and there is a certain being sitting on a throne, which is worshipped. Others kill the guardians, and those who worship this creature. These are the primeval monsters that appeared in Chapter 1 of the Imperial myth, having 8 golden eyes. Swallow Renee closes the book and talks about what's written in it. She says that just as Swallow said, after the details about the book spread to the public, the number of people willing to enter the dungeon increased. Managing dungeons also requires brains and being mystical and mysterious. Not an option, people should, haven't tried, and won't. Then it starts to clap. And it is necessary to tell a small part of the truth that the little people invented legends. We know very well how everything works there. Then he saw the little book that described the laws of the dungeon. Even if it was half fictional, they threw themselves into the fire like moths. He hadn't expected such a crowd, though. Show how he was able to calmly defeat all those knights who came. How many were there? 74. Yes, but most of their equipment was melted during the battle with 116 black tentacles, so they are of no use. All high-quality equipment is quite expensive, and Renee would be able to carefully process them without leaving any defects. Looking at the floor, he looks at her in silence, then agrees with her, and everything around begins to fight off a dark light and reach out somewhere. It turns into a kind of egg, after which his eyes turn human, and he stretches out one of his hands. He walks up to her and takes her by the head. They say that, of course, Renee could. And then they start to smile and blush. And Skeleton Patrick says they're definitely going to hold a conference here, or are they just having fun? Why is it just the 2 of them having fun? And he starts laughing. They say that they are so sweet that soon he will have tooth decay. Not only his teeth will rot, but also his head. And he asks the boss to change his body and do it normally, otherwise he looks like a man with a 6-fingered hand. After which, he notices that he has turned into a man with 6 arms, saying that there really are 6 of them. And he starts bowing, telling him that he is making progress, because the last time he saw 40 teeth, he got goosebumps. And when he said with a bright smile that the transformation would be successful, then Renee says that Patrick's chin is rattling too loud. She shows him her fist, starting to get angry. He stares at her in silence. He thinks to himself that to hell with them. He needs to get rid of the dungeon gatekeeper position quickly. Then she says that we need to get down to business and takes the papers. They all sit down at the table, and she says that everyone probably knows. After all, people finally started to invade through the right-hand road. The problem is that Mr. 116 Black Tentacles is seriously injured. His wound looks very critical, and the boss starts yawning, telling them not to sweat. Her tentacle regeneration is much faster than she thinks, and they will wait for some more time. If the situation does not improve, they will find a replacement for the gatekeeper. After which, the skeleton is surprised by this, saying that if he is looking for a replacement, let him find 2 at once, and after all, he also wants to retire. And he tells him what he can think about, because he has a lifetime contract. And in any case, from now on, the path of people will lie only through the right road. After all, they might already be forming new teams by telling them Patrick. And Renee tells him that these days people are using communication quite actively, a system like telepathy magic, so the information that a person has appeared on the right path of life may have already spread. After that, the boss slaps the table and says that then they will have to plan their strategy accordingly. Naturally, the teeth and says that they will change position. He says that Renee defended the left red path, and this is true. From now on, it will protect the right to receive, showing everything in the picture. People will think that the right path is clear and will go there and there, then you will show their times. And she enthusiastically says that Renee will protect the dungeon regardless of the number of people who rejected the master's people. And the red left path that Renee used to protect is now protected by Patrick. And he thinks why he will do it. And people who find out that Renee is standing on a polluted path will follow the red path that he originally defended, showing it all as it should be in the picture. But there he would meet them. There, it will be able to defend against 2 intruders at once. And he raises his hand, telling the boss to wait. And what happens if people follow the central blue path, and then what? After that, it Periclinillo. And he fell silent. And then they will have a chance to spend a date with him. And Patrick says it's a sloppy strategy, and Renee says it's great. And then her eyes start to shine and hearts are everywhere. There is a skeleton that says that God is with him. If urgent matters have been dealt with to some extent, it remains only to decide what to do with this sword. He asks her what kind of sword it is, and she says that he used team leader Burn. And along the way, the guys who invaded this time were quite strong and carried such a sword, showing how he was standing on a mountain of corpses. And he keeps asking her what kind of sword it is. Renee tells her boss that she must have heard, and Patrick goes for these. Then they say that here he takes it in his hands. This is one of the 36 masterpieces. It is very popular among people. Swinging this ball, there are also masterpieces that are not weapons. In general, among them, this sword seems to be the 14th in a row, and it is called like Tanibella. And he says that he remembered about 36 shawarma or something. And he also has several similar masterpieces. And Renee's weapon is also one of the 36 masterpieces. Show me her rounded blade. And he talks about how people walk around with a good gun. And he looks, and Patrick says what they'll do with it if they keep looking at it. If they give it to the guys at the entrance, people will pick it up again, and will have problems. So he pulls it out to him and tells him that he should have it. And he asks Patrick if he owns a sword and why he should not take it. And then he's surprised. He asks if this is true, and then starts to smile and shine. And if he can't help it, if he insists on it. This is the core of antiquity. A terrifying homunculus made with a blade lives here. She is very angry, looks at the fact that Patrick was given a gun and he is beaming with happiness. A death knight that exudes the energy of doom. And a huge ancient monster, which has spread out on the table. And Patrick got the sword and has to tear up the resignation letter that he hid between the ribs. The single-minded sole conscience of the dungeon and master of boss counting is Patrick. And the epitome of laziness, an ancient monster. Renee keeps a paper at her desk, talking about how they will distribute the remaining income. At this point, Patrick says that this is enough for him and looks at this sword and smiles. The boss says let's go as usual and continues to look at the papers. We'll take everything we can and use it uselessly as bait for the next group. After that, she smiles and says that she will take care of everything herself. Patrick thinks about being praised again. Either they agree. Then Renee becomes more serious and says that monsters can't use magic weapons and can remove magic stones and sell them because you can get a lot of revenue. After that, the boss talks about whether this is true, and then maybe he looks at them. And you say he should go to a human village. Then they wonder why they don't ask him what. He tells them why they are so surprised. And then Patrick says that maybe Renee and Ta should go. She winks at him. The boss starts tapping his tail and says what's wrong with an irritable look. And he says that he is not very good at turning into a human being. Even now, the tail is sticking out. And he looks at him with resentment. Patrick asks what happened. He agrees and tells her to grab some goodies along the way. After that, she sets off, saying that the weather is not bad right now. She is wearing a raincoat and says that then she will be back soon. Events are moved to the city. This is a small one. Unfortunately, we won't be able to buy one. A beefy old man examines one of the pebbles brought to her through the glass. They shine, and she looks at him and says nothing. She asks him why, and he says that as if where and begins to prowl something under the counter. He says see this Class B stone, and shows him a small stone that shines. To buy it, they commoners need to work hard for 10 years. And the stones she brought are much more expensive. Does she realize that? And only the magic of the Imperial Palace, or high-level magic, can use them. For example, the capital's goldsmiths, who have an agreement with the Imperial family and the Wing Mage Tower, could also dispose of them. So he says that this is the capital, and the towers of magicians, and thinks to himself that it is too far away, and you will have to go to the tower on the department. She says that she doesn't want to go to the Tower of Magicians, but takes her purse and says that for the sake of the master, she is ready. She says goodbye to the merchant, who tells her to be careful. Then he notices that she has left one of the stones on the table. He shouts at her to wait, because she forgot the stone. And so he just leaves, saying that this is a tip and thanks for the information. After which he looks at her. They say that she is strange. After all, she is a person. Tower of Magicians, Wing. It's a huge building that looks like a castle. Irina enters there. She says that she has come to sell the stones, and the servants tell her that if she wants to sell them, they need to meet with the head of their guild, and she agrees. They go up the stairs, and he says that he will take her to the office and she must follow him. And he thinks to himself that at the top is the office of the head of the Tower of Magicians. And this structure resembles the structure of a dungeon. After which he doesn't enter the room, and he points his finger, saying that this is the head of the Magi. Tak says, thank you for visiting them, and she's the head of the Wing Mage Tower Guild. This woman with red hair and a big smile. She is dressed in gray clothes and a light shirt. She looks at her, asks what her name is. She's hiding something, and she thinks to herself that this person has quite a large mana pool, and she replies that she's Ren. When they suggested that a child was looking for me to meet her son, she thought about how to react. But the guard said that she brought a large number of stones. Then they sit at a table and discuss it. Speaking of which, she thinks she's saturated with their tower, and hopefully her high-quality stones will match their turrets. Tam pours stones out of the bag and tells her to check them out. And they fly down, and she is very surprised. She is even stunned. Speaking of which, these are stones of the A class. Some of them are even the highest. And how can this little thing have such a treasure? She thinks to herself, who is she, and asks where did she come from. Then she thought about her hair. After all, among the 8 great families of the empire, there was one with hereditary silver hair, remembering her. And it turns out that the daughter of this family ran away from home and took the stones with her. And she thinks to herself that there is no other way to explain her property. And anyway, she's a noblewoman and I don't know how much they're worth. She says that she apologizes for her previous rudeness. She thought that the stones would be in such a state, and she would like to buy them. And it offers a price of 50 ounces of gold each for the highest quality stone. They offered a special price of 80,000 gold. She asks her for 50 ounces. So, remembering the words of that merchant who said that if you buy them, then in the middle we need to work hard for 10 years, and the average person earns 10 ounces of gold in a year. 10 years, 100 ounces. She thinks to herself, and she says that if she is cunning, she will die. After which she is surprised. It is my guess that she is not amiss. Says that, to be honest, you guilds don't have enough funds to buy them all. And she tells her to buy as much as she can, and she smiles excitedly. 2,000 ounces of gold is all they have. What would she say if they exchanged the remaining stone for something valuable? Are you sure about the price of the product? It should have been easy to sell, and you don't have to worry about that, but heat it up so that she can follow her and show her the items. They get up from the table and tell her not to let outsiders in, but they'll make an exception for her, because this is the vault of their tower. Then they go up to another room. They're watching. Then Yara of 4-carat diamonds, because in the middle of the evicted magic stones magicians, and inaccurately useful. This is a silver model. It is also red in color. Then she shows her another piece of jewelry. It is said to be a living black pearl, and if there is poison near the host, it makes a howling sound. This is a golden ring with a black stone inside. After all, these pearls were made using alchemy. She thinks to herself that this is alchemy, and is very angry, but she smiles. She thinks to herself what's wrong and tells her that she doesn't like it, because after all, alchemy is unsanitary and she can understand her disgust. Then she shows her another stone that looks like a red heart. She says it's a love stone. They say this diamond makes love a reality. After that, she thinks that this diamond embodies love. Her eyes begin to shine, and she smiles. If Variety Mana enters this track with the price of a stone in front of someone she likes, then 2 people living in it will establish eternal love between 2 people. Ta thinks that between any 2 and gives the word of the head of the tower. After something is asked if you liked it, and she shouts that she takes the bread diamond. So, she thinks and says that in any case, this precious gem could cause trouble for Vidin and drown the emperor in the depths of adoration. So she has to think about the price of such a thing complicates everything. She starts shaking and gritting her teeth, saying what, how and such. On the face is more visible with fear and surprise. She says that, given the money previously received, and this shows her weapon, asking me to give her this diamond. Someone calls for the head. This is one of the head of magic's assistants. He is very excited and asks her if she really gave away that diamond. And she's in a good mood, holding a bag of crystals and asking, so what's the big deal? He begins to say that if she understands what can happen to her, and so her death is not far away. Very worried, she takes the ring and says what's the big deal? A minor noblewoman wanted that diamond herself. At this point, she looks at the crystals received from her and says that it is really expensive. He says that even so, he smiles and tells him not to worry, and it will still die as soon as it is released. The unfortunate girl's loved one is also lying, so there will be no evidence left. After that, Renee smiles very much and goes back, holding her bag. She says she feels sorry for her lover. One of the 7 dungeons of Great Evil, Shady Castle. It's a huge dark castle with red fabrics all around it. The tip is badly damaged and a woman with red hair and a strong aura is using her scissors. She cuts off her hair. Irina tells her to apologize for showing up so suddenly and bothers her every time. It's the red-nosed girl cutting Renee's hair. And she says that she should quit and it's okay. The neighbors should help each other. And she wouldn't mind seeing such a lovely Renee. This girl with red hair, red eyes, and red lips. Very attractive appearance and with long nails. The boss of the castle dungeon, Shady Elizabeth Bathory. She smiles and says that in the end, if a person is beautiful, then everyone from afar will be so. And she's embarrassed. She says that sometimes she envies being a homunculus when picking up a comb. And that beautiful face will never grow old touching her cheek. And she continues to be embarrassed. She says that she also looks very young and your skin is cleaner than Renee's. And she says, yes, that you use so much blood to maintain the splendor, showing how she uses blood from corpses to maintain her beauty. After that, she gets up and asks her what Renee looks like to her, and she is surprised. She sounds stunning, of course, especially among those she's seen lately. And the one in her school uniform is smiling. She even assures her that no one will dare to refuse such a Renee. After which, I put my head on her shoulders, and that makes Renee laugh a little. And she asks her why Renee is preening so much. Did she really want to tell anyone? At this moment, she made a serious face. She takes out this stone and talks about admitting that she really wants to. In front of his eyes, you can see more clearly from the outside. And she is very surprised, but is silent. She is surprised and says, is it true? Because she was joking. No one does, though. And she says that to Mr. Boss. Her eyes were filled with love for him. And she was afraid of this and surprised. She says that she has a very good sense of humor and because she is a homunculus. And she says it's not a joke. Today, she confesses to the master in the sense, I'm very serious about it. And what does she like about him? After all, there isn't even anything to cling to when remembering what the boss looks like. She says that he has many good qualities. And, for example, he is reliable, showing in her eyes as a very good person. And she says she's reliable, but he's really good at it. But at the same time, he is beautiful, lazy, showing how he constantly sleeps. She says yes, he is lazy and there is a bit of indecency. He constantly snores and sleeps, and often slows down and recently grew a belly. She is surprised by this, says that you know all this, but her heart still reaches out to him and smiles. She says yes, I really like him. And then she tells him that she wishes him luck, and even though she feels like she deserves more. She winks, tells her that if he refuses, she will always be ready to comfort her. Renee thanks her. She says that earlier she will definitely be able to hold the stone in her hands. It is brought to the capital of the Rias Empire. Unified Dungeon Raid Command Center. This huge room with red flags. Video of the big dome. The man says that so, according to our data, the hero of Burn, the alleged victim was destroyed. This man got up from the table and is talking about it. Someone else starts exclaiming and says what it means, and didn't they say that they easily defeated the gatekeeper? Another man shouts that the bodies haven't been found yet and how they can be so sure of such a terrible outcome. Another man shouts that he couldn't have died from some monsters. But he sits and thinks to himself that they are all wrong, because the core of antiquity is not entangled in a small dungeon. It either passes in a day or does not return, remembering the monster that lives there. And now they don't get messages for 2 days, remembering what the hero looks like. He must be dead, showing how his sword stands in blood. And the other man with the big mustache thinks to himself that it is, and he says that with the Hisholt family ball. For a man with blonde hair, he silently approaches him and says that after the penetration of the squad into the core of antiquity, the connection was lost. And he thinks that until they go to this dungeon again, they won't be able to pick up the 14th masterpiece. This man begins to tremble, saying what is clear. Everyone is very excited. They say how it is so necessary to return it as soon as possible. Even Byrne's group couldn't pass the ancient core. After all, you cannot increase the number of victims. It is better to give up this venture. And another bearded man says that they can't just give up if the hero fought the boss, most likely, and the boss got seriously injured. After all, he's a hero. And even during their chatter, the boss recovers and the dungeon along with it, and we need to finish everyone off as soon as possible before the boss finally regenerates. A man with a gray mustache says that the Imperial family has already lost its favorite hero, and one of its 36 masterpieces. And if the second raid fails, they will definitely die. He is very agitated when he says all this, and if they let it go on like this, the Emperor will certainly be angry with his wife and pay for it. And he thinks about how, if we recall the boss of this dungeon, Bird couldn't inflict any wounds on the ancient core boss, and the group couldn't damage the dungeon. And it doesn't matter how many people are sent to raid, because the core of antiquity is impossible to conquer. Then they all droop and stand in silence. They are all worried and very surprised by his words. And then a man comes and says that I wonder why everyone decided so. And he thinks it's quite possible, and everyone is surprised by it. What is the Imperial magic community doing here? And you know who you get your orders from, don't you? It was a man with purple hair. They are dressed in raincoats and have 3 lozenges on their clothing. Imperial Third Eye Magic Society. The gray-haired man says that the Emperor has already begun to interfere. And one of the representatives of the 3 Eyes says that their presence means that it is time for them to pay for their sins by passing by everyone. And how the group killed the precious hero while gritting their teeth and looking at them with disdain. So also the masterpiece was left in the center of the dungeon. Then everyone freaks out, and he says, even though they're fucking screwed if you're sending everyone out, who's going to run the rest of the raids? So they decided to offer His Majesty a solution that might save your pitiful souls. Go through the core of antiquity again. I'm a man with a mustache says that even heroes couldn't pass that already about us. They walk, smiling, looking at them, talking about Nifrim. None of the representatives stood in front of them. He says Nifrim will go with you, and they started to wonder about what he said and what it is. A white-haired man. He asks her, tells him to wait, because everything ended in failure and he has too many problems. He says that he doesn't fail a certain success, and then the question arises, after which he hits the table. Why couldn't the hero and his party get out of the ancient core by standing in front of him because they were weak and because they let their guard down? No, not at all by. What could it be then? After all, the hero of his group had a clear problem. The only thing after that is to show your little finger. He was sorely lacking in what he had. This raid is bound to be successful. Then the dungeon boss starts sneezing, and he says he has a bad feeling, like something bad is coming. After that, he returns to his normal form and also sneezes and everything around him goes flying. Says that the infection is walking, or what? The boss tells him how he feels, even though they don't know when the humans will attack. He's lying on the floor and he's bored. So Patrick's going to scold me again if he's too late on patrol. He always instills fear, even though he is only made of bones, remembering how angry he is at him because of the truancy. Bones inspire fear. Then he starts laughing and gets up from the ground. He climbs up in a very strange pose, and they think that he will not give up on additional problems. After all, last time people invaded through a polluted path. That's where she'll start. Gatekeeper of the ancient core, Lord of the 16 tentacles. The boss walks up to him and watches as he lies covered in wounds and regenerates. He's lost in thought as he looks at it and thinks about how sorry he is for not being able to help and can only wait. It depends on how much of his blood is everywhere. It goes on, and looks at Manager 5 of the anthropophage room. It's a mutated plant, all spiked and cut, and he thinks to himself that if you don't let your memory down, then he regenerates and recovers on his own, as long as he has the main body and nutrients. Then he pokes it with his foot and thinks. He looks at the body and says that it is safe and there is no need to interfere. After that, its main body closes again, and he goes back. They say, what then? He jumps and lands on the ground, says that the problem is destroyed from room 1 to 4, looking into another cave. And they think that it seems that this should be discussed with Patrick, because he will be counting it out again. After that, he yawns and thinks that he will sort out the rest later, but in the meantime, he will rest. Here he thinks to himself that he only looked at the polluted path and the 5th room. But there are still 4, 3 in the rest, but this is already commendable. And Patrick would understand. He thinks about it all and happily goes back, and then he is pierced by something with a glance and a dagger flies at him. He gets really angry. And someone says that it is dirty little people who allowed the underground to desecrate their name with their presence. They're not going to get out of here alive, and then someone's coming at him, and he turns around. It was real, and she says it was his master, and she apologizes to him. She's wearing a pink dress, and she thought the damn thing was just nature invading. And the boss says it was her and gives her a hard look, and she starts apologizing to him. He says okay, he was just a little scared. In general, he looks at her and says that she is beautifully dressed and cut her hair. She smiles and says that he noticed and she is so happy about it. She asks how he likes her, and he starts to worry and says that some important event is planned. And he thinks to himself that she has taken off her maid's uniform. Did she want to quit before Patrick did? And she starts twirling her hair, smiling and blushing. Speaking of what an important event happened, she looks at him and tells him to spend some time with her, and he gets even more worried, thinking that if only this wasn't a layoff. After which, she brings her to a friend's private room and tells him to come through and welcome. She says it's a secret place, Renee, and they go forward, where there is a table and 2 chairs. He asks us to sit down and tells us that he will make tea. And he continues to think about whether it was only not a dismissal, and it would only be not a dismissal. He says it a few more times to himself. At this point, she pours him a cup of tea. She says that initially only she knew about this place, but now her master will know about it. And he continues to worry and agrees with her. She starts to blush and tells him, at which point he drinks tea and freaks out, thinking that she still wants to quit. She says it's been 80 years since they took her to the dungeon. Quote, surprised by this, she says if he remembers it, and he agrees with her remembering. After all, 80 years ago, there was a fashion for raids in more than 1,000 dungeons, and the number of people who penetrated the core of antiquity was destroyed, exceeded several 1,000. Show a huge number of broken weapons, which also killed people trying to get there. From then on, she got a nickname, remembering how bloody it was. He is surprised, says that she did a good job then and how is her right eye. He thinks to himself that thank God she doesn't talk about getting fired. And she says it's her eye, and he remembers, and that makes her happy. He says, or how else, how can he not remember? And she says she was happy to be around you. Ivan says it's mutual. And he thought about it. He thinks about the fact that I was glad. And such words are spoken before parting, aren't they? And she tells him, and at that moment he is very scared and thinks that if only it wasn't a dismissal. And it can't be so. And she tells him that she likes him. And he asks her in bewilderment, so that she can repeat it. She says she likes him, sir. All these 80 years, she's been waiting for this moment. And he continues to worry, and at that moment he grows a tail and ears, and he talks. What to start with? He looks at her and says thank you for her feelings. Says that they are always at the crossroads of life, and Death Ta looks at him. He says they don't know when they might be injured. They don't know when they'll die. And she doesn't want either of us to spend the rest of our lives alone. After which, she says that she knew it would end this way, and knew that asking for help was impossible. She took hold of her clothes and squeezed them tightly, and it is said that by doing so, she would not be able to keep silent about her feelings for the final centuries. But if she turns her back on her, she won't be able to survive this, and she wants to get his love by any means necessary. Any of them. Then he takes out that stone and says that he even uses such vile means. She goes to him with this stone, and he tells her to wait. And she says that with this dream of hers, there is a chance, and she gives him the stone. He asks her what it's like to pour mana in here, after which it starts to get angry and transform its form. He tells her that she is now trying to kill him. He, having transformed his form, starts to get very angry. And she starts to worry and asks him what's wrong, and the stone breaks and she starts to cry and says, what is it? And something climbs out of that rock and starts laughing. He smiles and says that to the boss, that this is excellent, and continues to giggle. He says that it is not the Tsar's business to expel people, although he says around him, where is his conscience, how can he be heard, and whether he is here in the neck to drive this is normal. And then the skeleton maliciously tells him that the dungeon boss could not distinguish from the pathetic rabble, and even cannot close his mouth from shock. Then he keeps yelling, hey, the boss says it looks like he's shutting down. He asks what this guy says, that he doesn't say anything to Patrick, what should he do? And he tells him that he created the problem, and seeks the answer from him. He thinks about it and takes a piece of this crystal. He says that, although in the case not only the boss is to blame. He breaks it down completely and says that, but that doesn't absolve him of responsibility for what happened to him. She goes up to his face and tells him why he covered his ears. And he tells him that he won't even remember that with him, and they start to worry. And he says that this is how he tells them that he will remind them. He shouts at the boss, who starts running away. He reverts back to his human form in front of Renee, and with Patrick yelling at him to calm down. But this one repels him. And looking at his face, someone says that what Renee has done, and she is sitting in front of this stone and crying. Patrick tells her to wake up and leave it to me, and let her escape. And he thinks to himself that she can't hear him anymore, and it will only get in the way, after which he takes his sword and removes it. Ta wakes up and he thinks to himself, what? Even if he couldn't think of anything better to do. And so she keeps her distance, standing in front of her to protect her. And the boss is angry and thinks that now. He says he wants to kill him too. And the boss gets worried. Patrick tells him if he remembered, and he apologizes to him, turning away. Patrick smiles and pats him, telling him that he's glad he's pleaded guilty and he can't understand what happened. It was, wasn't it? And show the destroyed crystal. They think they should probably look for Renee. Oh, and they can't think of a smarter question. It'll cheer him up that he thought he was going to try to talk him out of it. And Patrick says what he thinks of him, because we really need Renee. After all, from food extraction to managing the diet of other monsters, cleaning up dungeon repairs, replenishing and reinstalling traps, showing everyone how she does it all, and consulting on solving complaints in each room. Transform gold mining from revenue sharing to accounting. And Patrick goes on to say that and so on. But that was all on it, and let's be honest, this is a critical disappearance dungeon. Not you and the boss. And he agrees with him. But from someone else's mouth it sounds even worse. And Patrick tells him to find her before it's too late. And he's completely broken down. And he says that even if you get down on your knees, even if he sobs with sadness, reach your feet and kiss them. The main thing is to return it. And he agrees, returning to his usual human form. And he also gives him a bracelet, and tells him to take it with him. And it helps to keep the mana balance. This is an avenue with a turquoise stone inside. But you don't have to worry about the details, because the main thing is that it is expensive. And he is surprised by this Igor, that this is the one. And Patrick goes on to say that the truth is that he doesn't know if it will work on him, because he has 6 fingers again, and even if it doesn't do much good, at least he can transform properly. And the boss says that he is angry with him, because he seemed to know that this was all going to happen and prepared in advance. And where did he get such a thing? He points at her, and Patrick confidently says that he picked it up on the way. asking him to use the bracelet for its intended purpose because it is quite fragile, watching how he examines it. He puts it on and says we'll see and asks them to do their best, and relies on them in the future. And Patrick gets mad at him and says it's like he's going on a picnic, and they must return within 5 days because the human attack is coming. The boss says what he wants, that he will return before the raid, and the boss agrees with him. And Patrick says if he can't stand it without them, and I don't even know what will happen if they hit. So 5 days maximum. He shows 5 fingers and tells him not to forget that 5 days. He agrees with him, after which he turns into a coat next to him and says that we will definitely return with Renee within 5 days. Patrick shouts after him, and if he goes to a human village, he has to behave normally, because people might recognize him as a monster, and it won't end well. The man agrees with him, and he starts to smile and say that if everything goes according to plan, he will just destroy everyone. And Patrick shouts at him to tell him not to show off, because he does it all the time. After that, he sighs and says that everything is much more complicated than it seems at first glance, taking out a piece of paper. After all, Renee had left Dansu's teeth somewhere, and brought back the demon stone, showing news that 34 masterpieces out of 36 were sold at auction. And what was the price? And for her antics, she almost died at the hands of the boss. I think she has a hunch, because if the boss finds out about it, he will go kill them all. They say that they are all underdeveloped, and the apocalypse will come. And he thinks to himself that no, this is definitely not the time to destroy the world. Then he thinks about it and starts screaming. He's very surprised. One of the papers says that the Joint Command Center is raiding a dungeon, and is going to complete the core of antiquity within 3 days. And he remembers telling Tom he was back within 5 days. And the fact that it is not he who does not forget. After which he starts screaming and is surprised that for 3 days. He comes to a realization and says that damn him, he's going to go crazy soon. After that, they show a clear sky and how the boss fell to the ground and lies down in a huge crater and does not understand. The boss is lying on the ground and thinks what the hell. To himself, he says that he landed in the wrong place again 2 times already and gritted his teeth. He remembers the words of Patrick, who told him that his mother was unstable and it was better not to use her. It's starting to think. He looks at his mana draining hand, and they think it's all because of a lack of balance. And early to give up you need to do a couple more times. Coordinates of the village of Hasting. After that, black mana soars into the sky and around it. Where did Renee go to sell stones? It disappears. Nothing. A certain voice says that you have managed to go so far, little people, and only today in competence it grants you a glorious death. It was a woman sitting on a throne with 2 huge horns. She has pink hair and golden eyes. She looks at them as nothing. And the man in front of him says it's funny. And how could the demon be so sure? After all, they are the 32nd elite raid group according to the Empire's rating. Then he pulls out his weapon. After all, they are wars at dawn. They were soldiers dressed in brown-hued hats and cloaks. He points his sword at her, and he tells her to remember that name. Because we're the ones who will overthrow you, strange, and will be famous all over the continent. She looks at them with annoyance and says that they are pathetic little people. Speaking of which, she's the demon queen, then their 17th generation of Asmodeus. She gets up from her throne, uses magic. Purple-tinged wings appear behind it. Her name is Meljuta Rymagria. Then they start to smile and tell them to be proud that they found out her name, and finally, they will die. She keeps looking at them with her own eyes and they say that they will return. Naturally, his teeth start to worry so much that a drop of sweat runs down his face. Then they start moving, and he says the same thing to the demon queen. She pulls out her staff, and he moves toward her. She also starts twirling it and fights off its blows. The archer says that ordinary arrows do not take it. Dima says that support should be left to the leader. He screams so much that the pathetic little people don't know their place and start attacking, saying that they were burned alive, creating purple fire. It hits all the people standing behind it, and they start to burn. He looks that the fire is also directed at him and says that the devil. How could this happen? Everything around them starts to break, and they fall. He is surprised, turns around and sees that these are ice flows and really, she had already prepared a new spell, showing how the demon queen casts a huge block of ice. He picks up one of the tiles. After falling out of the floor, he throws her stove and asks if she thinks, because they did nothing. This slab flies straight at her, and he also goes on the attack with it, jumping back to her. She continues casting spells, and he says how quickly he wants to die, but also what fools they are, after which they smile and huge ice flows. They are directed at it. He, in turn, creates a golden shield, and she wonders when he did it, because she has already finished off their mage. She notices something and pays attention to it. 2 mages shout at the leader to continue, and she realizes that they created the shield, so she charges her arm with her mana and says that they are runts, and then she goes to him, and he jumps to her. He stabs his hand into the wall and breaks everything in his path, dust and shards from the floor everywhere. Their leader falls backward, and she, in turn, jumps back. They think what happened and what it might have appeared by looking at it. Huge clouds of smoke are everywhere. The leader's companions help him up, and he says that everything is fine. Who does he think it is? His mouth is already bleeding, and he looks very tired, and he didn't hear that another group had joined them. The demon, in turn, begins to cough and think to himself that it is really their support that has come, and if they have enough strength to destroy the castle, then things are bad. And who is it? Boss, he comes out and says if they know where the city is. The demon thinks, who sees this? All alone of everything in smoke. Does it tell people where the city is? There is a lack of understanding in front of his eyes. They are standing in shock, and she is also in shock. They shout at him that he appeared out of nowhere, and is talking some nonsense. He sticks his finger in his ear and is very surprised by it. And she tells him that he seems to be human, and she advises him to get away from the demon queen. And he is surprised that I call her the demon queen. She says that nothing will change from another incompetence, and she breathes heavily, lifts up. He thinks to himself that she's that demon queen. After all, her ancestors looked very different, remembering how strong they were. And maybe it's a matter of generations. After which, she says that their embryos are not full term, and they will pay for destroying her castle. Now she will feel what it's like to be humiliated by embryos. After that, these people shout out, understand that support has come. And they say that's great, because everyone will kill the demon queen. The boss stops them, tells them to stop, and asks them. They keep fighting the demon, and they say they're going to show you how your magic won't work on them. And they call him a natural scum, because he talks a lot and the support is already here, because he is not afraid to fight at full strength. The boss keeps asking for directions to the city, and they shout attack. They continue to fight and defend themselves against this demon, as long as they put magic in them. She screams at them to make the little people feel the pain, and they shout back to her so that she can feel it for herself. The boss in turn sat down and scratched his head everywhere, smoke and ruin. Rocks fly off. He thinks it's bugging him and does it with a disgruntled face. He thinks about how he needs to find a job quickly, and the campaign will not be able to agree, after which people gathered all together. We continue. I think that if Patrick is late, he will be angry, and how does it annoy him? He is told that one will continue to move, and the other says that he peed. Then he transforms into his own form and tells them to shut up. People don't want to run away. While he releases his magic, it transforms into its real form, and it's huge. People can't stand it. They scream and run back. They do not understand what is happening. Some of them fall, and some run away further. After which, he ate them all and continued to chew them in human form. By turning back, and the demon queen is very surprised that she was afraid. Bossa regurgitates them, and she gets even more scared. This suggests that what it was. She goes up to him and says that surprisingly, he is very strong, if she correctly estimated even surpasses the mana reserve. And he is surprised, looking at her. She looks at him with shining eyes, smiles, says that she has a lot of questions, and she wants to get to know him more. She starts hovering around him and says that who is he and what is this big one, and then ducks, what is his name and what is his secret. He is disgusted and silent, stands next to him and smiles. She asks for his forgiveness and says that she will introduce herself now. She stands up and says that she is the great demon queen. Then there are 17 generations of Asmodeus. She presents herself to him in the whole world, standing in a pose, and asks what his name is. He shows all his species that he is disgusted by this and how much she disgusts him. And he thinks to himself that to get information. He tells them his name, and they are surprised. He thinks to himself that if he sleeps down so quickly, there will be rumors. And Patrick said that you need to be more careful, and there is no point in revealing your real name. And he says he's Rowney, and he thinks he's only here to find Renee, calling himself Spald Roney, making a stupid face and showing a sign. Class. Speaking of which, he's a man with a beautiful smile, from some small town, 32 years old bachelor. And he thinks to himself that it doesn't sound very good, but he couldn't think of a better one. Continuing to show her the class. And she, calling his name, says, can she just call him boss? And she tells her what she wants. She tells Tom that it's great. First she has to thank him for his help. However, at the same time he smashed the slider to her, and he says that what is she up to? And she says no, if it wasn't for him, she probably would have been hurt, and starts thinking. Yes, and it does not help very much. She smiles at him and tells him she owes him a favor. And how can she help him? And he tells her that there is something, and Lena knows exactly how to walk to the city. And the one agreeing with and being surprised by the name. He thinks to himself that he's perfectly at the right place, and yet he didn't save her for nothing, because Renee will have to wait a little longer for him. His face shows happy. And then the demon queen. She tells him what kind of city it is and is very surprised. And that one, from a smile to a comeback, he thinks to himself, what is it? And wait, it's not that she doesn't know the path and she doesn't know what it is at all. And is it really so far away that they don't know about it? And he asks her where the nearest city is, and she is surprised, remembering what kind of city it is. If they are wrong, Rias is the closest. He is surprised and says that this is the capital of the empire, and the journey from it to Justinus by horse will take 2 months. Show us where this city is located and where the capital of the empire is located on the map. Then he falls to the ground and she asks him what's wrong and what's bothering him, and he says he's too far away. And she says that she understood him, and that he does not need to go to the capital. And maybe he'll use the teleportation center. And he asks her, what kind of center is this? And he says he's never heard of it. She explains to him that it is an invention created by humans using alchemy magic. It is said that this magical device forcibly creates the magic of moving through space. He is interested in this and asks her where she is. And then it says that where the teleportation center is located, and it is located in the capital. Boss and Melju went to Rias together. The boss looked around in surprise, and then asked if he was really in the central part of Rias right now. Melju replied that he was. He wouldn't find a place that contained so much information anywhere else. The boss thought that there was only a small chance of finding Renee, but there was no way she was going to Hasting, so he should stay here longer. Melju asked the boss that he said that he was looking for a girl with silver hair. That's right. Boss dejectedly replied that it was true, to which Melju replied not to worry, she would also go looking for her with him. The boss gave her a puzzled look, then asked if she wasn't the owner of the Demon King's castle, what would become of the fortress now? To which Melju replied with an embarrassed question to the question. The boss is worried about her, it's nice for her, but he doesn't have to worry about it. Melju struck an epic pose and then went on to say that she is the Demon Queen, a supreme being born to rule. The demonic castle is not important to her. The place where she stands is the demon's territory, and the demons that stand next to her are her army. The boss puzzledly said that it was like the power of the Demon Queen, such as the ability to summon all demons at will. Melju confidently replied that this is exactly the case. And then Melju added, even though she hadn't tried it before, the boss was looking at her thoughtfully, and inside he was depressed. Melju then shouted that since her father had done this in the past, she could do it too. Melju said that was just the way it was. But since the castle that her father gave her is half destroyed, there's not much she can do. The boss then rubbed the back of his head and apologized to her, and Melju replied that it was just such an unlucky place, people would always break in there. Melju and the boss walk down the street of the night city, and then Melju shouts that even she, will have a hard time if there is a human capital right in front of the castle. Melju then says that okay, they should leave the depressing conversations and start collecting information. The boss looked at her with an indifferent look, and then replied okay. The boss thought about what he had. A premonition that there will only be more problems, because it just seems that way to him. We are taken to a bar, where Melju places 2 beers in front of the boss and himself. The boss looks at one of the mugs in despair, and then wonders if it wasn't his imagination after all. He turns to Melju, saying that they are still far from their goal, why not? Melju finishes my mug to the bottom smiling and taps it on the table. And then I wipe my mouth with my hand and tell him that the boss doesn't seem to know much about the human settlements where all the information flows to the bars. Then she reached out and asked her boss to look around and listen. All the talk here is not cut diamonds of pure information. Melju then said that the boss only needed to think and choose what he wanted to hear. The boss looked around, repeating her words about what to think and choose. Then something caught his attention. He saw a board on which various papers were nailed, and then he asked Melju what it was. They went to the board together, and Melju replied that there was this thing here, too. She had talked about it before, about gathering information, and the boss asked her if she had mentioned it, and Melju said it was true. The boss walked over to one of the pieces of paper and started reading this sheet of dungeon raid squad members. He had heard that it was used to stop disagreements between different squads that were going to go to the same dungeon. The boss thought that no doubt he had already seen several squads breaking into the dungeon at the same time. Melju replied that otherwise they would have problems with the rewards. Pitiful humans, if they gathered more troops and attacked together, the chances would increase many times, as if they were trying to rush into the flames, blinded by greed. The boss threw a piece of paper and replied that it was better for them. Melju looked at the boss thoughtfully, and then asked what plan we should use. Could it be that the boss is also a dungeon demon? The boss is noticeably getting nervous. Then Melju came up from behind and menacingly replied that she thought it was very strange. She is the demon queen, so everything is clear here, but he is a simple demon from the dungeon. How can he move freely on the ground? The boss nervously replied that it annoyed him a little, but no, it would be difficult for him to explain, and then asked if she couldn't just give up on it. Melju replied that he had something to hide. She would never ask again. Everyone must have their own reasons. Suddenly, something caught the boss' attention. He saw the leaf and then wondered if this was his house. Fortunately, the squad leader is empty. He should have enough time. Melju, who was standing behind him, shouted out what was going on. She tugged on his arm, telling him to stop watching alone and let him show her if the boss was bragging about his height. Then the boss still gave her the piece of paper, saying that he understood everything. The flicker was partly glowing. She read aloud about recruiting a squad to raid one of the 7 great dungeons, the Primordial Core. The boss asked if Melju had ever heard of him, and Melju said that of course she had. 7 dungeons of great evil. They are the best dungeons that even stupid humans recognize. The boss said stop. They can take it. Melju bounced on her chair and glowed with happiness, and then said, and the goal of all demons. Also, among all the 7 great dungeons, it is the pinnacle of peaks. The being who rules the core of primordial creation, the king of all things. Protector of the god who punishes those who tremble with fear, the most ancient monster standing at the top of the universe. Then Melju squeaked, Mr. Devourer. The boss was standing off to the side. He was clearly tense. Then he realized that he was more like a landowner than a steward who got scolded by bad tenants. Melju looked at the leaf and said that among all the dungeons, she liked it the most. And so she wants to get stronger. If she could still grow stronger, she would eventually get an audience with Lord Devourer. Looking at her, I got nervous and then wondered what she was going through right now. Melju then said that isn't it cool, a power that no one else can match, and she really wants to be like him. Of course, her father was also strong. Unlike her, he was a king worthy of his throne. It was just that there were people who were stronger than him. Some Vern, that young hero. The boss asked in surprise, did that hero slay the Demon King? He definitely wouldn't want to meet him. Although in fact, the boss devoured this hero while yawning. Melju replied that she didn't want to spend her life running the dungeon like her father did. She just wants to be strong, so that the demons will be attracted to her power. She started to smile, and then went on to say that this is what she's trying so hard for, isn't it cool? The boss smiled and remembered his youth, and then replied that it was very cool. He wondered if he'd been like this once, too, so long ago that he couldn't even remember. Filled with enthusiasm, he led a powerful army that could take over half the world. Then he tried to understand all the secrets of the universe, hanging out with people he despised so much. At some point, he was consumed by emotion, and he gave people everything he had. But when it was over, he found out that it was pointless, and so he made laziness the goal of his life. While the boss was reminiscing, Melju had been sleeping on the table for a long time. The boss looked at her, puzzled, and then asked her if she was asleep, but of course he didn't get an answer. He asked her again if she was really asleep or not. Someone told the bartender that this is another submission request, and the bartender replied that it came yesterday, but he forgot to hang it up. Then someone was indignant that how can yesterday's events be made public just now, and what kind of dungeon, while the boss, holding Melju in his arms, tried to figure out how to get into the room. A worker was hammering a board, and he answered another ad to the bartender, telling him to wait until he posted it, and he would look at it himself. The bartender asked that the worker hadn't nailed it yet, that he would be fined if caught by the Imperial inspectors, and the worker replied that that was why he was putting up this ad now. The announcement stated that the difficulty level of the 7 great dungeons of evil. Primordial Core, near Hasting, the westernmost part of the empire, located in the Graphenia forest, is an underground limestone cave. There was a warning in the center saying that this was a danger level dungeon equal to the 7 great dungeons of evil. Only those who received an E's rank from Imperial officials or have their skills recognized can enter. List of groups taking part: Paymura Squad, led by Paymura du Bele, a total of 31 people. Raid leader Nifrin. At the bottom, the planned date of the raid was indicated, 72 hours after the request was issued. Then we are transferred to the next day. The windows of the room where Melju slept were open, and a pleasant breeze was blowing through them. Melju hadn't woken up yet. She was sleeping on her own bed. Suddenly, she stood up and then said that they had a very bad headache. The boss, yawning, came to her and asked if she was awake. Melju replied that she did not remember what happened yesterday. The boss replied that, of course, she didn't remember yesterday, because he didn't have time to finish. Something surprised him very much. Melju asked why he was so surprised, which caused the boss to fall to the floor, and then, without understanding, asked what was wrong with you. Was his eyesight ruined? Why did Melju suddenly become so small? A little girl appeared in front of the boss, completely different from the Melju he knew. Melju shouted that she wasn't small. The boss asked if she had turned her age back. Melju started hitting the boss's chest with a redder swing. She shouted that he didn't think he was throwing too harsh words. While Melju was hitting the boss, he asked why she suddenly looked younger. She scared him so much and hurt him. Melju replied sheepishly that she wasn't the one who got any younger. She continued to beat up the boss, saying so. Yesterday, she was in a uniform that nasty people don't look down on, version 2. And now in front of him, the first version, she looked at the boss with embarrassment, and then pointed at herself with her hand. The boss was bleeding from under his nose, and there were a lot of abrasions on his face. He asked her if she could say that. Before that, she did not have a basic form, but now she has adopted the one that is actually correct. Milju initially confirmed his words, and then in a panic replied that stop, no, it's not like that. She asked what was wrong with the boss's face, which was swollen from eating late-night treats. She went on to say nervously that in any case, for starters, transformation magic usually projects the future form of the user. Then she smiled and said that in other words, when she got older, she would turn into that amazing second version. The boss, sitting on the floor, said, "That's it." Belju Surov shouted that now he finally understood. The boss indifferently replied that yes, of course. Melju started shouting furiously that he wasn't satisfied with her answer, but the boss didn't finish listening to her reply that she needed to change her clothes first. Belju replied that it was enough to treat her like a small child. She would not forgive him. The boss replied that he understood well. We are being transferred to Count Hostin's residence. The troop on horseback stops. One of the fighters shouts, "Let Count Hostin listen to him. Tell him to open the gate now and let the raid party in." They had traveled all the way from the capital to attack the Primordial Core. Someone is asking who sent this message. They tell him that it arrived only yesterday and was signed with the third eye. A middle-aged man with yellow hair and rich clothes appears in front of us, very angry, and then he thinks that the third eye, those damned rogues from the Royal Society. This man is the Lord of Justina, Count Adark. The Count thinks that entering a B-rank dungeon or higher requires the permission of a lord who has jurisdiction over this land, slams his hand on the table, and then continues to think that permission is not even a sign. This is an order. After all, this is a royal order, so he can't even reject it. The Count asks his maid if she believes that this squad will definitely succeed in attacking the Primordial Core, but the maid remains silent. Then he turns his head, looking depressed. The Count keeps saying that they think the same. The knights under his house are too weak for this place. He's never heard of their leader Nifrim. Damn it, these guys from the Third Eye think. Then the Count thinks about the core of primordial creation. Then it is his region that will get into big trouble. How about we send out a stronger raid to conquer the dungeon first? The Count whispers that then he will need a legitimate squad for this. The maid turns to the Count and says that the answer may be closer than he thinks. The Count wonders what is closer. She means Tower of Magician's Wing. She is right, the wing can handle this task. Recently, they have achieved great success with the help of high-quality items of known origin. Of course, even with their rapid growth, it would be crazy for the Mage Tower to challenge the Primordial Core as well. But what if the rumors were true? The Count smiled. If the Guardian pauses, then the only monster on the dirty intersection should be Devourer, a boss monster who personally fought against the squad of the brave hero Vern. The Count ordered the maids to immediately send someone to the Mage Tower wing and make a request. The Count swears by his name. He promises a huge sum of gold and great honor, so let them win the Primordial Core at all costs. Suddenly, the door was thrown open with a bang, and there was a shout from inside that they were not allowed to enter. The maid and the Count looked at the door in alarm, and then the Count asked who they were. 3 people came to him and asked if he was a Count. The Count asked who they were, to which the young man with blonde hair replied that he was Nifrim. They didn't open the door no matter how much he called him, so he apologizes for the intrusion. The Count asked them what had brought them here without warning, to which Nifrim sat down in a chair and said, "Come on," the royal family had notified him. And then Nifrim cast a frightening glance in the Earl's direction, and went on to say if there was a reason why they shouldn't be here. The Count replied in dismay that there was no such reason, and then wondered what the hell the killing intent was coming from this little guy. A girl with a cute smile and green hair asked if they weren't guests. So what's the matter with his expression? Let the Count smile. And she also wants something sweet. Let them bring her some sweets, tea and chocolate. The maid didn't move. The Count then told her to go and fetch it, and the maid nodded her head in displeasure. The Count, sitting on a chair, asked what had brought them, and a girl with green hair offered Nifrim a cookie, to which he, putting his feet on the table, replied that he would not and let her not eat too much sweet. Nefrim asked the Count why he thought they were here, of course, to destroy the Primordial Core. The Count replied that it had only been a day since the letter arrived. They were very quick when they were going to stage a raid. The Jade replied that they were actually going to leave today, but something had happened. He understood, so maybe they would leave tomorrow, and then he asked if that suited the Count. The Count replied that they were not in too much of a hurry. The task was important, so he was sure that it would be better for them to recover their strength and only then go. It guarantees accommodation and hospitality. Let them enjoy everything to their heart's content. And then, Jade interrupted the Count and replied that no, he didn't have to give them so much honor. They stand at the Tower of Magi Wing and immediately leave. The Count asked why they should stop to take shelter and not someone they knew there. The Nephrim replied that it wasn't for such a friendly reason. And then he grinned through all his teeth and frighteningly replied to kill them all. The Count stammered and asked him what he meant. Don't lie, Nephrim scratched his ear, and then said that the protection in the Count's house was too weak. It was extremely easy to dry it with magic. On the way here, he had heard everything, and so the Count was going to hire mages right after all. The Count silently and fearfully looked at him. Jade continued to say with a smile that he only wanted to say that they had come all this way for the sake of the dungeon raid, so they couldn't just give it up. They would have to get rid of everyone who got in their way. Jade asked the Count if he wasn't in a winning position. After all, the one who was stronger would deal with the Primordial Core. The Count apologized for blurting out too much, and then said that he wouldn't be hiring anyone else, so they could go on a raid whenever they wanted. Jade took out a cookie from the bowl and said that they would do so then. As he bit into it, he replied that he was terribly pleased with the Count's grace. We are taken to a dungeon where there are clay figures. Patrick cuts down one of them with a flourish. Then he says it's almost time for them to arrive. We are transported to the sullen boss and Happy Melja. They walk through the city together. The boss looks at one of the workers and then thinks that it reminds him of something. Melju tells the boss that he should be here. The boss approaches one of the guards and says that he wants to go to the teleportation center. The guard looks at him in surprise and then says that they will have to reach him again. The boss asks what the guard says, where to go. The guard replies that this is the entrance. The center is located outside the royal palace, so you need to continue moving further. They will have to pass 3 more fortress walls. The boss frowns and asks how long it will take, and the guard thinks about it. And then he said that if you walk, then about a week, probably about that much. Boss and Melju shouted in unison for a week. The boss thought it would take too long. He wouldn't be able to find Renee, and even Patrick would run away at this rate. Melju whispered to the boss what he thought about flying magic. The boss looked at her angrily and worried that they might be overheard replied that they couldn't. If they continue to use mana, they will be caught by humans. The boss thought that if he used mana, anything could happen. Someone came up to them and laughed and said they were in trouble. An elderly man approached them and then said that he was sorry. He managed to eavesdrop on their conversation, so they go to the teleport. Melja replied that this is so, but who is he? The man replied that he was a divine rider, Belbeer. Melju looked at him ecstatically and asked divine. Belbeer pointed to the side with his hands and said that he had a homunculus created using alchemy, and behind him was a huge creature with white fur. He went on to say that it was Zephyr, a 4th-generation homunculus that had been disposed of, a product of the Imperial plan to create artificial humans. Melju and Boss looked at him in disappointment, feeling disgusted. Belbeer approached Zephyr and then stroked him, saying that he was strong, listened well to commands, and could also fly, but he could not fulfill his original goal of eliminating the fall of the church and state. Melju puzzled asked that then people stopped following the homunculus. Belbeer replied that of course not. The Empire will never abandon such a force, and it is now rumored that homunculi are being mass-produced on an industrial scale somewhere. The boss looked puzzled, then asked the homunculi, aren't they usually raised in large cylinders? Belbeer replied that as much as the guy's knowledge is outdated, this method of cultivation was used for the first generation of homunculi 150 years ago. Boss thought that 150 years ago, it had already been so long since Renee was born. Melju went to the carriage and said that everything looked good inside, and it looked like Belbeer wasn't lying about how long it would take them to get to the portal. Belbeer replied that she had a good eye, 3 hours in the air, an hour at the checkpoint, a total of 4 hours, although they would fly, but they would still need to pass the check at the castle gate. The boss then asked how much Belbeer wanted for it. He replied that it would cost 8 ounces of gold coins for the 2 of them. The boss fell into despair. He thought that 8 ounces of gold coins, this is 800 ounces of silver coins. A room in the pub cost 8 silver ounces. They together with Meljastoyali amazed by what they heard. It was 100 times more expensive than they had paid for accommodation yesterday. Melju turned around and was about to leave, telling the boss that she didn't have that much money, but after she stopped, he said that it looked like he had it. Then he punched his pockets and heard the clink of coins. Taking out the bundle, he saw a small note and a couple of gold coins. The note said, "Crooked-armed boss, one day you will thank me, Patrick." As the boss and Melju were flying over the city, Melju suddenly called out to the boss. Then she asked him who had given him so much money. The boss, yawning, replied that his partner in the dungeon's secret slipped him. Melju was indignant and asked if the boss was a dungeon monster and how it could move so freely. The boss replied that it seemed correct to say that he was turned away. Melju asked that then the partner he was looking for was also a monster that was chased away. The boss replied that in general, yes. Melju pursed her lips as she looked out the window, and then replied that they were envious. Even after leaving the dungeon, the boss was worried about his partner until the very end. She wants that kind of life, too. When someone cares about you, and you care about others, how incredible it is. The boss, lying on the couch, replied that this is how we are transported to the path of gold and the pleasure of the rose of self. The boss indignantly says that they can't use the teleport right now. The man replies that this is so, and they apologize for the undelivered inconvenience. Melju grabs the boss's clothes and says that she knew it would be like this, and then apologizes to the boss. The man says that if it is not urgent, then let them come again at 8 p.m. They have suspended all teleport sessions to ensure the safety of today's auction. If they are suddenly interested in the auction, they can take a look. As soon as the auction is over, the honored guests will want to use the teleport, so permission will be given from above to use it. The boss glanced at the piece of paper and then replied that the teleportation restriction was due to some kind of auction. The man replied that this time a rather rare item would be presented. A few days ago, they developed a brachycephalic tooth, whose location was unknown for a long time. The man continued to say that this was also that people could not use the teleport to enter the auction site. Melju looked at the piece of paper and said that the drawing was very beautiful, and the boss thought that it reminded him of something. Then the boss said that this tooth he also had. It's the same thing that his partner used. The man got nervous and then asked if he was sure and said that it was definitely the right tooth. Isn't it the kind of thing that whizzes when pulled and turns into a big sword and freaks everyone out? He doesn't understand anything yet, but there must be some mistake. The boss was filled with anger, and then he said that she was wearing shapeless clothes with no pockets to hide weapons in. The only one in the world. The boss clutched his head, feeling sick, thinking that this was a certain weapon of Renee. But why? But ended up in the hands of humans, Renee's people. No, this is Renee, who even bosses from other great dungeons can't touch just like that. Ordinary people would never be able to fight her. Renee is strong. She was called the Blade Maid for a reason. If Renee had the blade when she escaped, she was wearing loose clothing with no pockets to hide weapons in, and she threw one of her blades at the boss when he mistook her for an enemy. How many weapons did she still have? Renee had ever fought humans with less than 5 blades. Patrick is strong even without his sword, he just helps him. But Renee isn't like that. What's left of a maid with a blade when she doesn't have a blade? Melju, who was standing nearby, started to see the boss body transform. Boss kept thinking about how it was like Renee from ordinary people. The boss body transformed more and more, from pitiful people who could die. The boss continued to be consumed by the power, he said, if Renee died. The men watched in fright as the boss turned into a terrifying creature. The boss continued to say that it was a friend of humans. The man screamed in fright, telling the monster not to dare approach him again. The boss said that then it would be better for him to kill every single one of them. The man immediately fell to the ground, frothing at the mouth. And then the boss added that he would need to get rid of all the people. Melju shouted for the boss to calm down. She grabbed his arm and asked him to pull himself together. Melju asked him what was wrong and let him tell her. The boss turned to her, then said that he would ask once for the 36th masterpiece, the brachycephalic tooth. There is really only one instance in the world. Melju nervously replied that as far as she knew it was true. But what suddenly happened? The boss replied that it was the security item he was looking for. He needed to return it. Then he took her hand and said that she didn't have to help him anymore, even though they were together for a short time. But thank you anyway. Now he knows the way to get to Justin, so he can handle it on his own. Therefore, it would be best for her to get out of here as soon as possible. But Melju didn't stop. She shouted, "That's the person the boss is looking for. This is a dungeon monster, a silver-haired girl, a strong person who could use a brachycephalic tooth as a weapon." The boss froze. Melju continued by saying that it was the servant with the blade. Miss Renee. Bosky was singing with rage, and his nose was starting to bleed. Melju gave a startled smile and replied that judging by his reaction, it looked like it was true. The boss told her to stop and not try to provoke him anymore. He turned to her with a frightening look and asked her how much she wanted to know. Melju replied that he did not need to tell her anything, even if he spoke to her in such a frightening tone. Intimidation does not work for her. Then Melju smiled and said that she already knew who he was. Miss Renee is a guardian of the great core of Primordial, a supreme being. The boss started to calm down, and Melju went on to say that if that was the case, then someone who could call Miss Renee her partner. Great Lord Devourer, the master of the Primordial Core. The boss looked at her in fright. Then he exhaled and said that he was a Death Eater. Melju replied with an embarrassed smile that he was their boss. The boss didn't say anything, but inside he was disappointed that she found out. Melju laughed and said that she could tell by the look on his face, so don't let him get upset. It's just that her deduction exceeds any expectations. And also, She knows how dangerous the thoughts in his head are, so she will help him. No objection is accepted. The boss replied that as the Demon King, she really could follow such a simple logic. Melju replied that logical monsters don't become Demon Kings. The words spoken by the Demon King become logical. Boss wondered if Demon Kings were impulsive or something. Melju laughed and replied that it was a facial expression. This is the man she knows. Something that was really very scary. Such strange things were uttered. Melju then said that she was glad that he was back to normal. She would be with him from now on, so don't let him worry. Let the boss promise her not to use that voice. We are moved around on the day of the auction. Various rich people are sitting in the hall in expensive clothes. There is one guard standing near the main entrance, and he says to himself that he expected no one to come at all. What's the point of defending at all? Someone came up to him and interrupted, saying hi. In front of him was the boss and Melju. Melju had magically made herself look older. She was wearing an expensive suit with lots of jewelry. She told the guard that she came to participate in the auction and where she could enter. The guard confusedly said that she could enter here, but first he needed to find out who she was and what her name was. Melju replied that she was Melj from the Agraya family, and her companion Demd was next to her. The guard opened the list of people who should come and asked them to wait a second. And then he apologized and said that her name wasn't on today's list. Melju laughed and said that it just couldn't be. Melju then turned to the boss and asked if he had brought an invitation, and the guard just stood there looking at them in a daze. The boss replied that yes, this is it, and slowly began to approach the guard. The guard said that wait, this auction was not distributed. He didn't have time to negotiate before the boss punched him in the face. Looking at the guard, the boss replied that this was an invitation to the afterlife. The boss asked Melju if she could somehow change her appearance, to which she replied that why could the boss not resist her beautiful face. The boss replied that she was just a child. Melju shouted that she wasn't a child at all, which was good, but they needed to hurry. Melju shouted after him to take it back now. We are transferred to the Chaktitsky castle. The boy lay on the bed and said that Renee would never come back. Pervostiny will not be able to return to the core. 80 years ago, the countess forest was ablaze. Someone turned to his grandmother and said that he was very sorry. Who expected people to do something like this? But still, the forest will recover quickly and be happy, right? They finally returned the favor, didn't they? Before our eyes appears the lady of the forest, Grafenia, named by the witch, the fairy of the earth countess. She has razor-sharp fangs, green hair, and 2 horns stick out on her head. Boss thought that countess had used this forest in the main area as a base, so he needed to look good in her eyes. Looking at the corpses in the house, the boss thought that all the people who started the fire were dead. Then the countess's rage should subside a little. The boss stood on a huge pool of blood, and then continued to speculate on what to do with it now. He looked at the bars where the girl was sitting and said it didn't look like she was involved in the arson. The more he looked at her, the more he realized how adorable she was. They called this species homunculi. Sitting in front of him was a little girl with snow-white hair and emerald eyes. This is not a human life form created by humans. The boss thought that he would really have to kill her. Nothing good would happen if there were any witnesses. But he turned to the girl sitting in the cage and said that these were the words of her deceased owner. But now she is free, and therefore can leave. The girl sat in shock on the floor. The boss thought that for some reason he wanted to act on a whim. He took hold of the bars and said it didn't mean he was helping her out of here. Then, with great force, he pushed them apart, saying that she was trapped and would be devoured by wild animals. And now the choice is hers, Rello. The boss said that her owner was looking for a servant named Rello, but since he can't see the others, he might assume that's her name. As he left, the boss said that this was the end of his mercy, which he had shown up to this point. Rello knew I was behind bars, watched the boss leave, and then said my name out loud. Rello is the name of the servant who reports to the patriarch of the family, and the name of the one who was considered the best maid. Rello of this generation was a middle-aged servant girl. And this homunculus couldn't be called Rello, and I never was. After all, items don't have a name. However, for this reason, it is Rello. We are taken to the Chakti castle, where Renee is sitting at the foot of it, looking at the castle. Someone is walking behind her in a raincoat, telling her that the Empire-directed subjugation army is heading towards the Primordial Core. Renee tells Bathory that even if Lady Bathory tells her, she can't go back to the core. Bathory replies that she didn't tell her to come back. She appreciates her happiness, but she values her freedom and choice even more. However, shouldn't she do something about it? If they're talking about that couple, they've probably scoured the entire continent looking for them. When they finally find out what happened and how she was deceived by people, what would Patrick do, let alone the boss? If she plans to hide, then she needs to stop going out completely, forever. Bathory went on to say that she didn't have to worry if Patrick found out. He would take care of everything. The Primordial Core should be ready, because the attackers would arrive soon. If Renee wants to put an end to everything now, then now is the time. Then she turned to Badora. I said she wanted to go for a walk. In the end, I asked her to stop, saying that her right eye was getting worse, and she really didn't want her to go with it. Renee said she was fine and thanked her for her concern, then asked where her blades were. We are taken to the boss, who pushes one of the servants against the wall and asks him to tell him everything he knows about the brachycephalic tooth. The servants, panting, say that the Coston Tower of Magi Wing gave him to them, and he really doesn't know anything more. The boss wondered if it was Justin after all, and then asked the servants again that it was the Hoston Tower of the Magician in the Wing, right? He dismissed the servant and thanked him that he had told him the truth, that he would let him live. And then the boss and Melge started to leave. The servants whispered, clutching their necks, he almost died. He's just a guard. What did he do wrong? Suddenly, the boss moved to him and then said that he didn't do anything wrong. He's a man who hasn't done anything wrong, but he's unlucky enough to get in his way. The boss asked what people called when they entered their territory. The guard pressed himself into a corner, then whispered, "Is this really a demon?" The boss continued that they had ever called it a massacre, or a massacre. No, they use pretty words like conquest and strategy. Have they ever felt guilty about being killed by monsters? Does the guard think they died because they did the wrong thing? The boss loomed over the guard, and then replied that no, here he is with him as well, he did it just because. That they were enemies. We are taken to the auction, and a shout is heard in the hall that the bid is 3.5 million gold coins. The bet is quickly interrupted, first by 5, and then by 7 million. The auctioneer asks who will give him more. One of the dear ones says that she is bored. Maybe she should also join in the process. She thinks that she can throw in a couple of fake bets for fun. The person sitting next to her apologized to her, and then asked her to come to her senses. They are here as guards, not clowns. The girl with turquoise hair and iron hands laughed and then said that she couldn't even have fun while Garrett was around. It was an officer of the Order of the Knights of the Black Wolf Warrior, Win Historia. Standing next to her was a tall girl with pink hair, who told Historia to remember their mission. It was an officer of the Order of the Black Wolf Knights, Pathfinder Garrett. She went on to say that they needed to finish quickly, and then something to eat. The stockbroker asked that there were no more bids. Historia has been thinking that, for example, a salmon sandwich or pumpkin pie, and she also wants pudding. The auctioneer said that the winner was number 3, and they were done with it. Dark tentacles appeared above him and a voice was heard saying whose permission. Then a piercing wail was heard. The boss said that he would decide when the auction was over. Everyone in this room, and Wu auctioneer was stabbed by one of the boss tentacles. Historia and Garrett stared, startled. The boss slowly walked forward, and then asked that everyone wanted to buy back the brachycephalic tooth. He was right. There are only 3 heroes in the Empire. One of them is Bern Hishold, after he died in the core of antiquity. They were attacked by public criticism, claiming that he died because of his pride, although he was a hero whose primary task was to protect the people. The anger initially directed at the deceased Bern naturally passed on to the remaining 2 heroes. And XX History, one of those 2, had to win back the trust of the people of the Empire. Therefore, her fighting spirit was suppressed by the screaming instinct of self-preservation. Historia rushed into battle, but Alla stopped her, and she said she couldn't. Alla was very nervous, and then added that they can't interfere at all. Looking at the boss, she said that he was very dangerous. The boss walked up to the booth on the stage and then laughed and said that he didn't believe the blades were real. The boss thought that he thought it was a fake, but the traces of Renee were very clearly visible. If she really died at the hands of humans, the boss forcefully pushed the flask that protected the brachycephalic tooth. The boss then took out a weapon and said that it would be a bit difficult to explain the situation. But this item already has an owner, so he will return it to him. Then the boss turned to the people looking at him in fear. He knows that they were betting in anticipation, but sorry. Well, looking at you. The boss did not have time to finish. One of the crowd shouted, "What is the guards waiting for? Let them immediately detain this impudent man." The boss replied that since they didn't want to let him go so easily. That's good, he's of the same opinion. He grabbed a gun and then said he would tear them all to pieces, and then buried under the rubble of this building. Someone in the crowd jumped at high speed and shouted if he thought she was going to let this happen. Historia was flying at him, and the boss thought she looked like a flying squirrel. It's a decent move, backed up by decent gear, but too clumsy. The boss dodged the blow with ease. Historia jumped out of the way and immediately turned to her boss, who continued to think that she had nothing but a glove. Then he thought that if he did, he would break her arm, and she stared at him intently as she tied her sweatshirt around her waist, along with these gloves. Then the boss added that it wasn't bad for a human. Historia once again leapt at the boss, into the dust, who was ready to take her blow. He grabbed her arm, and then I got scared, and I realized. The boss flew into the wall at high speed, breaking through it. Historia was breathing heavily as she looked in the direction of her opponent. The boss slowly started to get up, then asked that the girl wasn't an ordinary little girl. Looking at this, Historia wondered how he was still alive, how it was possible. After all, I would be able to defeat most of the dungeon bosses without even leaving a trace of them. And these gloves, replicas of the apocalypse, should be able to withstand the strongest damage at least 3 times, but they just broke in one hit. The glove clattered to the floor. He looks at his body, and Historia thinks that he has a dark liquid or gas, but not an ordinary monster. Then who is he? The boss started laughing, then apologized. A huge black wall appeared in front of the story. Someone called out to her from behind. She turned to see Garrett running. Historia screamed at Garrett to stay away. Forward, accumulating a blue lightning bolt in your hand. We are taken to the boss and Melja. Melja is asked if it's okay or the boss. He made her worry that everything is fine with him. Melj, with small tears under her eyes, began to ask if everything was really normal. She thought that he had no chance of survival. The boss replied that it was so, but somehow he did not die. He thought that such a blow couldn't be made by an ordinary person if she stabbed him in the heart. From fright, he would be able to return to the main form. If the disguise was revealed, then Patrick, he doesn't even want to think about it, would rather die. But first, the boss looked into the distance. Looks like those girls, they ran away. Just think, there were as many as 2 squirrels flying. A pink-haired girl in particular led all the people out while he was distracted by the other one and created her own shield of magic on the blue-haired one, all at the same time. The boss smiled, then said out loud that it was funny. We are taken to the city. Someone shouts that something has fallen from there. What is happening? One of the men shouts that someone is there. The other asks if they are awake. The man, looking at the story, says that she has a big wound. They need guards, although no let them call healers. Historia thought that she was a warrior. And still, she was blown to smithereens by some nameless monster. Whether the people from the auction would be safe, and what about Garrett? The man was telling her to get up carefully. Suddenly, someone in the crowd said that if she called her name so softly, she wouldn't be able to hear her. Garrett was standing in front of the story, smiling at her. Historia started crying. With that said, Garrett, she's alive. Garrett walked over to Historia and started to squeeze her cheek, saying that she needed to thank her first. If it wasn't for her, she would be preparing for Historia's funeral right now. Historia thanked her. All of a sudden, she noticed that Garrett was bleeding and said that Garrett's arm was torn off. She told Historia not to make any noise, because she was still alive. Historia threw her arms around Garrett, and then cried out for her to forgive her. She was not worthy to be called a warrior. Suddenly, Garrett called out to Historia for her to get ready, because she's a warrior. No one would want to see an Imperial warrior roar like a baby. And then Garrett whispered in Historia's ear that losing one arm was a small price to pay, and then asked if Historia knew who their opponent was. Garrett went on to say that monster, it was a Devourer from the Primordial Core. Such information shocked the story. Historia looked at Garrett incredulously, then asked if she meant something, and even if she wasn't joking, such a monster couldn't possibly be here. Garrett said she didn't know why, but she was sure of it. It really was him. That Black Calamity was an ancient monster, a Devourer. He had many tracks, Warmaster and Hishutol, tracks less than a month old. Garrett turned to history and said that the situation is much more serious than they thought. At this rate, the Empire can collapse. History sat in shock. And then she suddenly shouted that if it really was a Devourer, then they should fight back even more forcefully. This is the land of humans, a place where they have advantages. Garrett turned to history saying that they can't solve this problem on their own. There's no way they can win right now. They simply don't have a chance. They need to hurry up and request support from the Dungeon Raid Union headquarters, then report the situation to the royal family while she goes alone. Garrett used whisper, color healing magic on Historia's bruises, and then said that teleporting them to 2 in her current state would be hard, so let Historia be here. Historia's wounds healed quickly, and Garrett kept saying that it wouldn't cure her completely, so she asks that you don't try to follow her and just wait. Historia got up from her knees and shouted for Garrett to stop, because who knows when this monster will go on a rampage again. Garrett replied that even so, let Historia not leave this place. Teleport along the way so that history stays here. Historia screamed after her to stop before she disappeared into thin air. The boss thought that he was really annoyed by everything. He should just leave the fugitives and go to Justin, or chase after them and get rid of all the dangerous elements. Melj stared at the boss in disbelief, not sure what to do. He has successfully recovered a brachycephalic tooth, so his business is over here, but he has a purpose to remember. At least he needed to find Renee's body. He told Melja they were on their way. She replied with a sad face that she understood. The boss asked what was wrong with her. Melj said it was all right, she was fine. The boss urgently asked again what had happened. It's easy to see from her face that something has happened. And then Melge told the boss, he is really very strong. She thought she would have realized it back in the Demon King fortress, but the more she gets to know him, the more amazed she is at his abilities. He had told her that Lady Renee was his colleague, but that he looked much stronger than her, or that she had misunderstood something, or that she had simply underestimated Lady Renee. Let the boss answer her. Who he really is. The boss scratched his head, and then he hit Vika lightly on the head and said that she was. Why is she so sad about this? He's just the boss. As soon as it's all over, he would tell her the whole truth. Now, they need to get out of here. Let her show him the power of the Demon King. Melge nodded contentedly and said, okay. She took off her sweatshirt. Then she struck an epic pose and said whatever her boss said. She used the reconstruction skill, Dark Lightning, to strike in the middle of the city, at the sight of which there was an incredible strong explosion. People watching the fire shouted what had just happened, what kind of explosion it was. Historia, looking at it, thought, something place. There was also an auction. They do this right in the center of the capital. Residents shouted that their houses were on fire. There are a lot of people in the capital. Historia got to her feet and wondered what to do. She remembered what Garrett had said, telling her not to try to follow her and just wait here for her. Historia gritted her teeth, and then suddenly, someone grabbed her arm. It was a small boy, and he whispered with tears in his eyes that his father was there with him. Historia said that everything will be fine. Let the residents not worry. She'll take care of everything. After all, she is a warrior of Historia. She headed towards the explosion site, thinking about how she couldn't lose to such a monster. We are being transported to the site of the explosion. The boss kicks through the blockage, and then, as he removes the boards, he calls Vika. He angrily asks what the name of the magic she just used is, and Melge replies that it is a reconstruction, an advanced magic that shakes the earth. And then, being in the sky with a smile, asks if he liked it, because it's perfect, isn't it? The boss indignantly asked that she didn't have any other magic that could be used in this situation. Melge replies that everything is fine, even if he doesn't blame her for every little thing. The boss was so cool when he told her to get ready, so she used the clearest magic she knew. Melge, sitting on a rock, continued to say that if he was going to complain, it would be better to say in detail what he wanted to see. The boss replied that he believed that she knew what to do. Jivu guest sighed, and then thought that things were getting more complicated. He asked Melge if she remembered the way to the teleport, and Melge said of course she did. The boss told her to go there first and protect him. People would definitely gather there. Tell him to prepare the teleport for the journey to Justin, so that he immediately went there. Melge indignantly replied that she understood. But he keeps talking about Justine, what kind of area this village is located in, and the boss even stumbled over what he heard. Then he desperately turned to her and asked her if she even knew the coordinates of the core of the first building, and Melge said of course she did. After all, she had said countless times that out of all the dungeons, she loved the Primordial Core the most, and Justin was the closest village to it. But to be honest, she only saw the Primordial Core in books, so you replied that you understood everything and let her just go. Melge left with a smile, shouted that taking care of the device would protect him, and the boss waved to her and said that he would catch up with her soon. He was walking among the rebel, and then he laughed and asked that they were already here. He looked up into the clearing smoke and asked how many of them were there. There were men in front of him, wearing handkerchiefs over their faces and blue long cloaks, and one of them said that they belonged to the Langori family, one of the 9 pillars of the empire, and not the Blue Crane band at anchor. A man with light-colored hair and a scar on his eye said that the captain of the squad was talking to him, and who he was. The boss thought that they were too lazy to show off. He just didn't understand people. Okay, he had already thought about it, and showed them that there were surprisingly many people outside the auction, so they were in the army of someone present. The boss turned to them and said they wanted to know who he was and why he should tell them. The boss started to transform, and then he said he was their enemy. We are being transported at the same time to the core of primordial creation. Sylvia turns to Jade, saying that people who enter this place never return, and if he dies there, his soul will be in and he will wander through the underworld. She suggests that he just go back, because he is also afraid, and Jade Severe replies that he will stop around. Sylvia says she can't even have a little fun. He's so boring. And then he adds that this place isn't strange. The first room they passed through had monster corpses everywhere, but this one was completely clean, as if someone had cleaned up the place. Nephrim turns to his soldiers and tells them what they think. One of them thought for a moment, then replied that no idea. Hishutalt's squad wouldn't have cleaned up along the way. Some of the fighters put forward the theory that it might have been some monsters with high intelligence. But wasn't the dungeon cleared all the way to the 5th room and the boss room? Then it shouldn't have remained monsters that could clean up. Nephrim said no, but why would monsters want to clean up corpses at all? All of a sudden, Jade shouted for someone to stop doing their pathetic tricks. Why was he looking down on them? Someone, being in the dark, said what a loud voice he has, even his bones vibrate. Anyway, unfortunately, he didn't cheat on them, and he just doesn't like seeing corpses everywhere, so he tidied up, two blue eyes shining in the dark, and went on to say that he did it while waiting for the guests, and it would be sad if they scolded him. Jade shouted for Sylvia to turn on the light, and Sylvia stammered, okay. She used magic, and a yellow sphere appeared in her hand, lighting up. Patrick was sitting in front of them, and he said that the light was very bright. They were shabby guys. They tried so hard to get here, even though no one invited them, but welcome. Jade looked at Patrick and wondered if it was a skeleton. And then he said that it was Patrick, the Death Knight, who was standing in front of him. Patrick said that he even prepared a grand welcome, but it was all for nothing. And for him, we won't be able to give the speech that we've been making up all day. Well, thank you. The soldiers prepared their weapons for battle. Patrick kept saying that they guys are not the easiest audience, and how about we put the weapons away first to calm down a bit. He shouted at the sorceress to lower her staff, and that martial artist lowered his fists. Jade leapt at Patrick with his sword, to which Patrick asked that he had said something strange. Jade yelled at Patrick to stop talking, and Patrick calmly repelled Jade's attack. And then he added that he didn't have any manners at all, didn't even let him catch his breath. Jade lashed out with his dagger at Patrick, using ice soul magic. The entire space was engulfed in icy smoke. Patrick said that he always goes through it, but it's hard to be alone, even if he is confident and knows that he holds the victory. The Jade repeatedly attacked Patrick, swinging its blades. But then all of a sudden, Patrick raised his hand up, and a huge sword appeared behind him, rising up from the ground. Patrick, looking down at his sword, thought that unfortunately, things weren't going as he expected. Jade used a huge number of spells, a strong body, reading banners, feathers of light, step of silence, boiling blood, ashes of bones of a famous warrior. Patrick grabs his sword and says that to think that the source of the Jade's power was reinforcement magic, isn't that absurd? He thinks that the duration of the enhancement isn't that long. 1 minute, he only needs to last for 1 minute. Jade continued to use spells, strengthening, strengthening, strengthening. Patrick, looking at it, said that it was a little. Jade put his foot on top of Patrick and told him to try opening his mouth again. And then he asked who had beaten whom here. Patrick shook his head and said that it was very good. He didn't think that he could just be knocked down by magic. Sylvia looked at this and whispered, is it really over? Even the core protector of the first building isn't that strong. Then Patrick said that just as he thought, you need to get rid of the split hair first, and the sorceress. Sylvia listened with emotion to this. Jade pressed down on Patrick's chest and told him to. And then he shouted for Patrick to die and swung his sword, but Patrick stopped the blade with 2 fingers. He laughed at the top of his voice and replied that this was fun. This time he really played it. He apologized to the people and said that he wasn't going to make fun of them at first, but when Jade saw all this and couldn't kill Patrick, he panicked, and Patrick went on to say that over the past couple of years, he was too bored, even if it was just a game. He wanted to feel the danger. Thank you for making him laugh. A dark dungeon. The guy screams. There's fear on his face, and he's very scared. He wakes up and gets to his feet. He grabs his neck and tells me what happened. And then someone tells him that he finally came to his senses. He, in turn, looks at the person who told him this. After all, it was all over in the few seconds that he was unconscious. Then he sees Patrick sitting in front of him. A knife was driven into his shoulder. He says they think it's easier to see for themselves by extending their hand. Of all the people that Death Knight Patrick has met so far, no one has managed to return alive. It depends on how many corpses are behind him. And he says that not a single person has succeeded. Then he says that he thought that since he knew his name, it was also true that he was wrong. Then he takes one of the bodies, rushes to him and says that this green-haired sorceress was difficult to deal with. And he recognizes her as Sylvia. He starts walking towards them and pulls out a sword from his shoulder and says who would have thought that she could use holy magic. And it still makes his bones itch. At that moment, he approaches Sylvia, and he asks him if his name is Nifrim. And there's a smile on his face. He says it was the sorceress who shouted his name very loudly before she died. And he keeps repeating her name, speaking of how she was calling out to him so desperately. Then he fell silent and lowered his head. And Patrick says that he was hoping for a more violent reaction, but there is no such thing from the word at all. He calls him heartless. Then, drawing his sword, he says that it is time to ask questions to the survivor. They are very. I would never send 30 people to death and no offense, but their squad is below average in level. He holds up the nodding animal, telling it to tell him what they're hiding. Never a very kind, polite skeleton will give you a choice. He will respond by slightly raising his right hand. If not, then his left. He raises his right hand, and Patrick says it's a wise decision. If he revealed everything, then he would kill him painlessly. Then he shows his index finger, and he is very angry, saying that even now he is being very rude. He raises his blade up and wants to attack him, saying that he respects his choice, and then he will kill him slowly. After that, he stuck a blade in it and says that when he should clean up all this, he leaves. And the one with the blade on his back is sitting over the dead body of the green-haired sorceress. And Patrick goes on to say that he thinks this time it will be easier to clean up the mess than last time. Then he wonders to himself if Patrick has left. He looks at the sorceress, and the blood drips on her face. He calls out to her and sweeps up to her face. He brushes the blood away with his fingers and apologizes to her. He opens his mouth and his fists are huge. He says that he must survive. Then he starts eating. Patrick is standing behind a rock and thinking about what is already chilling to the bone, and nothing is impossible. And eating corpses to become stronger recover. And it gets stronger every time it eats them. And he watches as he, in turn, devours this sorceress and only sees the corpses of interesting people. What is the source of his power, magic or alchemy? He looks at the many corpses and says that there are enough of them, so he will observe for a while. He sighs and asks where is his boss. He folds his hands and asks me to complain so that he doesn't wear anything strange in unfamiliar places. Events are transferred to the boss. The girl standing in front of him asks him what happened. On the arm of a huge iron sleeve, and the boss himself is at the top. Over the corpses in the fire. He kills another person and looks at that one. And she says that yes, she also came to die. And she replies that no, because she is the hero of history. This is a white-haired girl with pink eyes. She struck a pose and tensed. The one watching her transform into a different form. And he says that the punches on her name and morale are impressive, but she can't beat him. Then he thinks to himself that even if he does, he's surprised. She tells herself that she has to stop him and attacks. She jumps straight at him with lightning speed, and he blocks the blow. He apologizes to her and says that he will not allow himself to be hit again. Taking her other hand and pulling her close, he holds her tight and tells her to try to escape again if she can. So, there is a panic, it becomes scary, and he knocks it over. She thinks to herself that she can't win. She took a lot of damage and a lot of blood came out of her mouth. She thinks to herself that she has gained at least a little time, and the hero should act in accordance with his status. He keeps throwing her back and forth, and she tells him that she has to do her duty. After that, he picks it up and says that this is all and was very surprised by this. She's in very bad shape, covered in blood. And she's trying to say that she's the hero of history, and she can't lose like that by opening her eyes. And she can't let him in while looking at the boss. A blue aura appears to the inhabitants of the Empire, after which the Empire uses magic from behind. She screams and slams her fist down. They say that she is a hero, and she must protect innocent people. This blow did nothing to him, and he says that she will not die in vain. She falls to the ground, and he says he'll remember her name, though he's not sure for how long. And she falls, and in deference to her insistence, he would kill her painlessly. After that, something hits him, and he is surprised by it. He looks in the other direction and asks, "What are these peppers? You can't all come at once, that you come one by one." These were the soldiers of the Empire who saved the hero, and they had to use radical methods to save themselves. They ask for forgiveness for such bad behavior. The boss gets angry and says that, thinking throwing something in the back of the head, then it's so easy to get forgiveness. The man comes forward and asks to introduce himself. The boss thinks to himself that he was ignored. A black-haired man with red eyes says that he is a member of the Black Wolf Knight Order of Edelbraes. Our Edelbrest in Gaul Rivison requests an audience with the Great One. The boss asks why he said his real name and how he understood it. He stands in front of him and says that the person under his guidance has a special ability that helped to recognize you. He gets angry and thinks to himself how smug he is and says, "Whatever, do you know he's in a bad mood right now? And to waste his time, if you're going to attack, you need to do it faster." After that, it begins to turn into its own form. And he apologizes to him and leans down, says that there was a misunderstanding. Sir, they did not think to fight with them. In fact, their goal is to offer him a deal. And he gets even angrier. They say what kind of deal? And he looks like he's missing something. After that, he begins to turn even faster and says that he should take a sober view of the situation and will mock him and get an extremely painful death. After which, it turned all of its golden eyes straight at him. Speaking of which, this gamble is for the sake of the Empire's safety. Well, they say that the original owner of the Dandu teeth is still alive. And he calms down. He goes on to say that he is confident that they did not come all this way just to collect a unique weapon, and they will provide any necessary assistance. The boss goes to him and tells him that he doesn't need anything, after which he shoves his hands in his pockets and says that suddenly he took Danda's teeth just out of boredom, and the real goal was to exterminate people. and they ask him what he will do then, standing right in front of his face. Black Wolf starts to worry. He says if he's going to ruin everything anyway, why would they try? And he says that well, he also does not mind doing without unnecessary sacrifices. And he asks him where the owner of the Dandu teeth is. And they start getting angry again. Black Wolf tells him that as he commands, so it will be, and then calls his servant. And he comes to him. He says that he has already met this girl, and to find out the location, you need to study the tracks. It's obviously in bad shape. But if he doesn't mind, she'd like to see those teeth. He pulls them out of himself and says that if he does something he will lose his hands, it will turn out to be flowers. She comes forward excitedly and says that she understands. And it feels the predominant footprints of one person, showing on the map what. It is located in the Hasting of the Mage Tower wing. And now they are in the Imperial capital. And the distance is too great to determine the exact location. But this person is located to the west of the Imperial Palace. He thinks to himself, if it's in the west, then it's that city. And that's enough. He remembers Belne and the way she called out to him. Speaking of which, she's still alive. He starts laughing a little and lowers his head. He wraps his fist on Black Wolf's shoulder and says he owes him a favor and he'll remember it. And he says that they are honored to help him. After that, the boss tells them to get out of the way, and everyone goes their separate ways. Then she says that he was late, holding the defense against a large number of people and barely holding out. He comes to her and sees how she killed them all. She is all wounded and tells him to take a look, because she kept her promise and bequeathed the teleport with all her might. She falls to the ground and says it will be enough to repay him. And he catches her and says that this will be enough. He says that she is doing great and thanks her, and she turns into a small form and starts to sleep. He carries it next to him, on his tail, and says that you need to press this. He sets the coordinates of the city and asks to lead Mana. He is surprised, and everything around him begins to collapse, and a huge amount of water climbs out. He is surprised and thinks to himself that his Mana to stand there without understanding what is happening must have broken down. And he was already calm, because it was the station that had stabilized. And the main function of this bracelet was to suppress Mana. Shouldn't the teleport have been a great ride? Anyone who thinks that he will have to turn on, then everyone will know who he is. And he thinks to himself that he's already done a lot of things. I remember Patrick counting him out and telling him not to give up. And he thinks to himself that this is a complete fiasco. He decides to remove the bracelet, and its shape begins to show. He apologizes to Patrick. After that, a huge amount of Mana is released, and it all collapses, because he appears in his true form of a black creature. He thinks to himself that the coordinates are lined up. Tower of Magician's Wing. Events are transferred to this tower. The man says that someone is welcome to the Tower of Magicians, and to pass it, you need to confirm your identity. It was a little girl. Her name is Rello, and she says that a person here can use the magic of movement. He says that no, this tower is covered with a barrier, so it is impossible to enter here without proof of identity. And she says that then, after which she pulls out a few ruts. And he is surprised by this, and she says that he will not be able to escape. And she kills him on the floor, and his blood comes out. She thinks to herself that when she first came here, she thought the tower was like a dungeon. And exactly, the Mage Tower is also a dungeon. But only with people inside, going ahead and killing all the subordinates. She cuts them into many pieces and keeps going, already smeared with blood itself, naming only weak monsters. It's getting higher and there's blood dripping everywhere, and there's a lot on it, too. She says that she has dealt with everyone starting from the first floor. She continues up the stairs and says that only the last floor of the tower is left. The woman says that she is surprised that someone will be her enemy, so prepare so carefully. This is the little girl who came in a few days ago. She is surprised by this, says that it turns out that she is not a person. She made a hat and has a very large staff. Tak tells her where Dandu's teeth are. Then the sorceress says that it is now her own thing, so she doesn't have to answer. And now something interesting, too. She tells her that she is looking at her with a smile. Why is she still alive? She calls to her and smiles. She asks why is she still alive. Then she goes down and stands in a rack with her knives. She is surprised by this, says that Bajicki such a cutie does not fit this weapon. And she's going to attack the guild head with a measly knife. After that, it creates a magic shield, rolls around, and attacks it. Tak tells her what she can do with them, and Tak breaks through her defenses. She was surprised by this and says that she took down her defensive magic in one hit. She thinks it's a child. No, it's a monster. How strong is it? Then she attacks her with serious eyes. The guild leader thinks to himself that the tower is built right above the mana source, remembering how there is a huge amount of mana all over the tower, and therefore she can win if she uses this flow. She asks her where she is, and let her answer, and she violently attacks her. The guild leader says it's a pity, but she's not here, because she put them up for auction a long time ago. After that, he continues to attack her with magic, using the magic kingdom. A huge red ring appears in the sky and lightning bolts shoot everywhere. She swipes at her staff, says that she looks very strong, and that's why she won't hold back, creating a huge spear. The Spears of Longinus. It uses the division of persecution, accelerating the defection of the holy light corruption attribute. After using such a large number of spells, she directs all of them at the girl, saying that let her try to come back, and she looks at it all, after which the tower explodes. She says that's how everything that happens when you pretend to be human will be a monster, showing how it's all in copies. Wounded says it's a top-level magic that even most dungeon bosses won't be able to resist. And she stands there holding her staff and smiling. But she's still tense. I think, what if she couldn't take that punch? And she is surprised. Her hands are cut off, and she falls to her knees. She says that it is very painful for her, and how is it? What with her hands? She stood in front of her, covered in blood, and said that she only cut off her hands and let her not make any noise about small things. The guild leader says that she doesn't want to die, and she must survive, after which she continues to scream and tears appear in her eyes. Is she asking to be saved? Trying to escape, but she presses her with her foot and says that this is the end. She erased her Batari tracks. She keeps thinking to herself what to do next. She barely goes to lean on the wall and says what Renee has left. She's very tired if she falls asleep now. Then someone shouts chapter. He asks her what happened and tells her to wake up. It was one of her employees, and he's lying to make her last a little longer, and she says she's in a lot of pain. She tells him to heal faster, then changes her mind and tells him to kill this girl. He looks at her, and she looks back. I don't understand. He says he tried. She was resting and she lost too much blood. Showing the crystal, she says if she can see it. She talks about what she doesn't see, and he repeats, he doesn't see. He says it's a high-grade magic stone that will allow her to escape from here. There's something dark about this stone, and he says that he doesn't have enough mana to activate it, and let her help her with it. Renee thinks to herself that it's the same thing that was in the stone when she gave it to her, and will never forget this terrifying energy. She pours her mother in and says that everything will be fine now, starting to cry and closing her eyes. She opens them abruptly and says that she will live. Something starts devouring her, and the light starts screaming very hard. He stands up and says that she has made too many enemies. Otherwise, why would she come here and take revenge? Then she screams in pain. And he's talking about even her family. I ordered you to be eliminated if I noticed anything suspicious. And he looks at her and smiles. He turns to her and doesn't say, isn't that Miss Wren? He bows to her, sins to her, and thanks her for doing his work for her. He's still writhing in pain. And he says that if he continues, she might come for him, right? Then her whole body starts to swell up and explode. And he says that's why it will be some kind of insurance, which will give him a little time to escape. He apologizes to her, says that after that he wants to leave. Something appears from the guild head. It has many eyes and a huge mouth. She thinks to herself that her right eye is completely blind, and this is not an opponent that can be defeated with a wounded body and without proper weapons. But that's enough. She says she's pathetic, and that she would pay for her sins here, and she would erase her tracks forever by remembering the boss. Even so, let him not dare to use his dirty hands, after which she gritted her teeth and said that she would interrupt the master's smell. She attacks him in the eye and says that if they die, they will die together. It hits her with a tentacle, and she's thrown back. She keeps thinking to herself that when he finds out about her death, will he be sad? Explosions occur at the top of the tower, and the boss came to the place. He watches everything from above, and the entire tower collapses. He asks if she's okay. This one looks at him and says it's just like the first time he saved her. When her body and mind were empty and she didn't see the meaning of life, he appeared in front of her. He has picked her up and is looking at her, and she calls him master. The boss catches Renee, and they fall together. She is surprised by this, looking at him covered in blood. They land on the ground and she thinks to herself, why is he here? And he tells her to wait a bit, and he turns his back on her, and she looks at it and thinks it's her calcification. Does he approach this monster? He is very angry. He tells her how brave it was, and she clearly did not understand who is at risk of touching. He half transforms into his normal form and attacks her. He stabs her, then tells her to know her place, creating huge black spikes from his hand and piercing it all over. It makes grunting noises, and he completely pierces it. He looks at her with Summer's eyes, lifting up and starting to twirl. Then he lands it on the ground. This will look at her. He sees that Tam is almost dead, and she tries to touch him with her body. He dries up, then throws a few more punches, calling her an abomination. Her blood is everywhere, and there's blood all over his hand, and he thinks that's what it is, and now he's got it all figured out, turning it into a bloody mess. He stands there and says that he thought about why she keeps being reborn, and he knows it's mana. it regenerates again and attacks again. He says that this source of power is the tower. Show him a huge mana pool under it, and he says that made it even easier. After that, it transforms into its main form and eats everything together with this monster. Then he says what a mess she is and leaves. He looks, probably, she turned away from him sitting on the floor. He walks up to her and tells her that there was so much he wanted to say to her when they met, but now everything is out of his mind. Sitting down with his back to her, it would help him write it down on a piece of paper. He scratches his head and freaks out, says if she's met a guy with green hair, and he killed him on the way here, that's not a problem. Tam is silent, and he calls out to her. He apologizes to her for what happened a couple of days ago, and she cries. She says there's no need to apologize so much, she deserves it. What happened, and she can't see it. And he says that the ancient core needs a gatekeeper like her, and it needs her. She tells him that doesn't he resent her, and he says no. She asks if she hates him, and he says no. He says he has something for her, and gives her a new weapon. Is this what she left behind? Then she starts crying and reaches out to take the weapon, and she hugs him and continues to cry. Her tears are pouring down. She says she was very scared, and she was afraid that he would hate her and leave her. He stands there and smiles, looking at her, says it won't happen. He holds out his hand and says let's get them back. The core of antiquity. Someone asks, is she a homunculus? And they met when he was dealing with forest fires, remembering how they found her with Patrick, and he tells him to cover his mouth while he yawns. Is this girl sitting next to them? And this time, he saw her lab, thought it was fate, so he took her along. Patrick says what it means is that this little body has homunculus sequences embedded in it. And he thinks to himself that the core of antiquity is so full of evil energy that it is called a demon sanctuary. And she is not afraid to even be in the room of the strongest boss. It means that she has enough mental and physical abilities to cope with the pressure, showing all that demonic aura in this room. She sits there, doesn't understand anything, and doesn't say anything. Patrick says what will they do about it, child? And the boss says that let her live here. It seems she is capable, so first she needs to be taught how to fight. They teach her swordsmanship and tell her that if she doesn't want to learn, then she can live as she wants, showing how she can both lie down and cook something. Besides, she has experience as a maid, which can make her a cook, and Patrick tells him to wait a bit. He wondered if he was serious about learning, and who would do it. Either C points a finger at Patrick and says he'll do it. He is surprised by this and wishes him luck. And he is aware of the situation and asks, why him? And the boss tells him not to say no. He was bored and had nothing to do. Patrick says it is, but he looks at me and thinks to himself that since she is a homunculus, her physical abilities must be outstanding. And perhaps there is still a hatred for humans in her subconscious. Then they sigh or ask her what her name will be. The boss says what's her name when they first met. He heard something lying down and saw his belly. Is he looking at her to him? I wonder if she can talk. She says her name. And he asks if she has it full, and if there are no others the boss asks if it is necessary. And Patrick says that the boss is the boss here, and so maybe he will give her a new one. And he thought about it, saying that why him? He calls her Renee. She starts to blush, and Patrick says he'll go, then her name will be Renee Rello. Then he looks at his boss, who has fallen asleep again. He comes over to sit on her knee, tells her that she is surprised. And he forces her smile and tells her that she teaches her to smile first. After that, he is angry and says why she is smiling. And what did he even do hosting once the tremor of the earth has already reached here? Danced like a madman in the middle of the village, or that after which the boss freaks out and says that Patrick in the life of monsters there are always exceptions. He keeps another demon queen and Patrick pointing at her and says this is also no exception, and he says it's a long story. Patrick tells him that he really did kidnap the child, pointing to the sleeping demoness. He says he doesn't look like someone who would do something like that, and Patrick gets angry. They say that, by the way, where is Renee, who you were supposed to return, and why did he bring this child here? He tells him that while looking at the reflection of his grandfather, he met Renee in a human village. Patrick is silent and asks her if she was hurt. And the boss says she looked exhausted and maybe they were restricting her the whole time. Then Patrick goes and says it's not true, and let him say that it didn't work out for him, that he's making a drama of it. He grabs his head and agrees, dejected. He says okay, then now she will wear a maid costume, manage the dungeon. After that, Patrick gives him a piece of paper, says that the application for dismissal is already ready. So what are they going to do next? Sighing heavily, the boss says they will wait further, maybe she will come back again. I roll over. Patrick says that he understood and thinks to himself that when the boss is in such a state, it is better to leave him alone. And he leaves. Now it is hard and sad, but the time will come. He asks his question and calls the boss. He says someone has come and he asks who is he. Who is this who? This was the person they had been waiting for the most. Then the real one appeared, dressed in a maid costume. One of her eyes turned green and the other yellow. She asks the master if he has eaten. If not, she wants to cook dinner for him. They're surprised, and Patrick asks him if he's surprised, too. He wonders if he really gave her the eye, and if he did it consciously and sincerely. He remembers telling her that her right eye had become quite bad, and if she had been able to see clearly, she would probably have seen the stone right away. She sits in front of him, and he says that if she still has the feelings she said she had, by closing that eye. From the second at this moment, tears are coming. Hey boss says whether she will love him always. Then he touches his eye, says next time. Let her bring him a real love stone. Doesn't give her his eye. She smiles and says that now she will truly be with Mr. After that, drops from the ceiling drip on the demon Nessa, and she wakes up. She thinks to herself where she is and what happened, rubbing her eyes. Patrick is sitting in front of her. He sharpens knives, and she is afraid of this. She tells him if she is dead and that he is in hell. And he says what kind of nonsense it is, because this is the core of antiquity. She is surprised by this and says that he is really the same Reaper, Mr. Patrick, pointing at him, and he shows her classes and says that she thinks quickly. He wonders how much more sleep he's going to get, and he wonders what it is. Patrick hits the boss, says that he wants him to wake up, and she is surprised by this. The boss wakes up and says he was sleeping so well. Why did he wake him up by yawning at that moment? The demon is surprised and starts to stutter. It is said that he is the lord of all things, the rulers of the core, the ancient god, the guardian, punishing the bullet ancient monster, standing at the top of everyone and everything's lord. Then she bows to him. She is very worried and says that she apologizes and asks to be allowed to introduce herself. She is the demon queen, a descendant of the 17th generation of Asmodeus. Here he smiles maliciously and says that he already knows this. What a strong idea this is, and she wonders about it, says how he can know her name. And had Svald told him that, remembering him. And she wonders where he is, and she remembers exactly how he took Danda's teeth and went to punish people. She looks around and doesn't know where he is, and he says it's him. She is surprised at this and says that it is really true what he just said, and he repeats that. He's me. And that in shock, she is silent, and then begins to panic. Inwardly, thinking that how was it that she had behaved so badly in front of her master all this time. Patrick calls him over, and he notices him, and he says he wants a word with him. He gets angry and asks him what it means to start punishing people and if he will deign to explain it. He starts to worry. Patrick says that let him follow him, and he agrees, showing the entrance to the dungeon. Forest Countess border of Justina. Someone says that well, they said not to go here, but nothing happened, and there are many good herbs and mushrooms in this forest. It was the girl who collected them, and she wonders how something appears behind her. It was a man. He's badly hurt and all right, Leon. He's breathing hard, and she runs to him. He says that now she will give him medicinal herbs. She gives them to him, and he begins to eat them as if not in himself. And he also eats this herb, leaving blood on the lamp. He laughs and says he has to go. Dungeons are war zones. Here on the battlefield, there are virtues that you can't survive without. Lady Melior, you are the demon queen. So stand still. One of these virtues is minimal pressure. Renee tells someone to keep quiet in Mr. Death Eater's room. And how many times do I have to tell him that? And Demonism says she doesn't want to and refuses. She's a free dungeon monster. And they're yelling at each other. They bump heads and tell each other that he is not only the demon queen, but also a guest of the ancient core. And she came to talk to the dungeon master, Mr. Devourer. Renee says the master needs to sleep. And the demoness says that's why he needs her. And while Lord Devourer is sleeping peacefully, she will share the warmth of her body with him, snuggling up to him, smiling as he said it. And she points her finger at Renee and says she's too callous about it and too old-fashioned, and she's like an old woman. And she was very angry and surprised that she was called an old woman. Even as she spoke, she started to stutter. She uses her weapon, says that she will kill her, and she shows her faces and runs away laughing. Renee tells her to come to her and she will put her to rest, and she laughs and says no way. Minimum pressure. Patrick watches it all and says it's a total ass. The boss says they make so much noise that it's impossible to sleep and tries to cover his ears. Patrick says that's just the situation. What to say about such a thing? Because of some lawlessness happening outside, does he know? The boss says it's so bad. And Patrick, that he thinks they haven't read the newspapers he brought, and that a lot of troops have been mobilized to strengthen the defense, and they say that monsters are being destroyed on the border. He is surprised by this, and Patrick adds that the Lord also committed suicide. In this regard, Hastings was in a state of emergency. The boss says it's bad and consumed that. However, after 3 weeks of searching in all the human newspapers he managed to find, he found only 3 articles related to our city. Going through all the newspapers, he looks at the boss and says if he understands this, what it might mean. This one is surprised and says no, waving his hand away. And Patrick starts to get angry, looking at him. He tells him what he even thinks before he speaks, and at this rate, he's going to hand in his resignation, starting to get angry. He is afraid of this and does not apologize to him, telling him to forgive him. He gets hurt and says that he's thinking about it, and Patrick sits next to him and says that he won't say exactly. There's not much of it, that he's not sure. And his best guess is that Hasting has cut off communication with the outside world, that's all. If he destroyed the village, then he must remember how bad it is. He again begins to hesitate and wonder. Patrick gets angry and looks at him, saying that the message from the village that has suffered devastating damage is definitely a bad banner. The Primordial Core needs it, showing on the map that they are close together with the city, passing through the forest. And as long as they keep an eye on this city, they can tell when and how large an invading force is coming for them, so they need to get there as soon as possible. And there's no telling what will happen if they delay it. Then the boss looks away, says that in this case there are good roads, and let them not overdo it there. And he thinks to himself that if only he would go on his own. Patrick gets up and leaves, saying that in that case, he'll be back as soon as he can. He is surprised by this and says that it can't be that simple and he just told him to leave, after which he thinks about taking a nap and smiles. Then Patrick turns around and angrily tells him that no matter how you look at it, you don't have too much on your plate, and I think it's best if he goes with me or someone else. After that, the boss is very surprised by this and asks them to wait. The Belts and Demons fight stops, and they pay attention to the boss. Dinasa tells him something is wrong, candidate number 1. He thinks to himself that it's a little dangerous. If she was visible to magic, it would be explosion magic. If she uses magic that was used in the capital, then there will be no trace of the city, remembering how she ran amok. Which means, after which Renee smiles and says that wouldn't it be nice for the master if she went to candidate number 2. After which, Demogsa asks Renee to let go of her collar to start breathing heavily. She probably thinks to herself that there is no. It won't be very good, remembering how she also ran amok in the city. If it's explosion magic, demonims, or Renee's magic of mass explosions, it's best to help without doing anything. She asks him to stand still. And Patrick, smiling, looks at the boss of the game. What? Due to such events, they don't know how long it will take, and wouldn't it be better if the boss went with him? After that, he presents a picture of Patrick using the boss to catch fish by catching the net. And he thinks to himself that he is trapped and will not be able to escape because they will drag him away with them. And then he realizes something and says that he has a great idea. What should he do, remembering that mana control bracelet? He says he broke it last time and it can't transform. Patrick says that's true, and he definitely can't go with him without the bracelet. He smiles, or that it's cool he doesn't have to go, and now he can finally get some sleep. After which, in his human form, he says that he does not shine a beautiful death. And Patrick tells him that they've gotten to the point of cursing him, but sorry, this body is already dead. He's wearing a helmet so it doesn't show that he's a skeleton. And he says that still didn't he say that he can't go with him because he doesn't have a bracelet. And Patrick says what does it mean if he has it with him, and there's no problem going with him anytime. And the boss shouts at him that it's not. After that, they don't come back to their place. And Patrick asks him what he really did right here to love. I was standing in a ruined tower. He says there are 4 simple ways that can help you appreciate the liveliness of a village. The boss asks me what they are. And Patrick replies that he wants to check the number of people in the market. And the boss says there's no one here, so it's time to go back too. Check the chimneys of residential buildings, and this can be done during dinner, but it's too late. The boss agrees with him, saying that it's late and it's time to go back. And then Patrick takes him by the cloak and drags him along the ground and tells him that this is a way to check how many mercenaries and conquerors are in the center of the submission reserves. But it has nothing to do with the city, so they skip it. He probably says we should go back and ask him to do it. And Patrick says that the last way to check is a hotel or bars, and today they are, after which he notices that the boss has gone somewhere. And then the boss charged up and says that what Patrick is waiting for, and let him follow him. And he thinks to himself, what was that? The boss is very encouraged, and Patrick tells him that it's better not to get your hopes up, and Post says that the owner will give him a place to rest. After that, they say a curse, looking at the floor, the ruined bar. And Patrick says it's all very bad. This place does not function as a village in any way. Remembering the many corpses, the result is something dripping on them, after which discharges occur, and they turn into something. And the person standing over them says that everyone did a good job. Because of this village, the enemy's heart of the Imperial capital is located there. He points out that they are being told that because of the Black Calamity, humanity is at its most vulnerable. And it's time to destroy the Empire. It was a white-haired skeleton with blue eyes. Everything is ruined and chairs are lying on the floor. The floor itself is also in poor condition. Patrick says it's too bad. I didn't think the inn would be so empty. And it looks like the city is completely isolated at this point. The boss wipes the table and looks at how much dust is on it. Those who do not call so much go, and they pay attention to them. He says he is an innkeeper, but for some reason they came here. And he's holding a gun behind him, and he's shaking. Patrick says he is a knight of the Black Dog Suppression Squad Petarian of Netrange. At this point, the boss is lying on the table, and Patrick thinks he must suspect they're trying to attack him. He says they would like something to eat and find a place to sleep. And the man says that since you are a guest, he asks for forgiveness, but he has no food to offer the knight. And honestly, no matter where you go, you're unlikely to find that he's coming down to them. Oh, it's all because of the Black Calamity, and that our head suggests that apparently they know him and then hope for their understanding. He says he is being grilled and told, but they don't have any prepared rooms, let them enter their position. He thinks to himself that I think that in the current situation, even the price of water exceeds the cost of living. He gives him money and tells him to take it, and he catches it and asks what is it. He asks him if he also thinks they have nothing, and he looks at the gold coin. Finally, he says they can go up the stairs. He examines them and asks him what kind of person is behind him, and the boss tells him that who is he. And Patrick says he's This one is surprised by this. Patrick says that even though he is but he is very useful, and he treats him as a slave accordingly. The boss is surprised by this and tells her, but Patrick continues that can stay in the same room with me, where I and my will live together. Then he leads them into the room, and the boss says it's better than he thought. Then there are 2 blue beds, a table with a chair and a blue carpet. He jumps up and down on the bed and says it's his and it's much better than this place they stayed at. Patrick says yes, it's a very nice room, and goes through the cupboards thinking he'll put something in there for now, and the boss asks what is he doing. And speaking of which, he really should have called him. And Patrick says they are, of course, and aren't these rags your most comfortable clothes? And when he's walking around in something like this and you're taken for a beggar, it's much better to be treated like He began to sulk. Patrick says dress like a beggar, you won't notice how you're getting into a fight. And the slaves are the property of their masters, so they won't be messed with. Show off how Patrick's boss is on a leash, calling it wild catfish is a careful dog. And for you in general, the ideal option, if you do not want to bother with a change of clothes. And he also adds that he doesn't want to move as little as possible, and he agrees with him. He says that in the next life he will definitely be a stone. And Patrick takes something out of the closet, and says that then he'd better listen to it and your words are full of wisdom. He wants to go outside. They say he will go for a walk and tells him to rest and wait here. The boss tells Patrick that he doesn't recommend him to change his mind on their first day, and Patrick thinks about it and says that it's better for him not to worry. Pirates, there's no place for him to sneak in at night. He thinks to himself that after the Black Calamity appeared in the central square, the Imperial family expressed their resentment over the attack and they will need someone to take charge of the weight. The Primordial Core. Patrick climbs one of the tallest buildings and looks from the side. What with the city he sees, what his boss did for the whole, and he says that he really tore up this place. But before the Imperial hand could reach him, the Count died. Then now standing at the head, he takes out a little book and reads it, saying that he is very curious to know this, and it is obvious that the chance of the lost Imperial family to turn their anger on his 7, and considering this, whether the Count's relatives could inherit the title. He held his jaw and thought about it. They say that now should he go and take a look at the new lord, standing on its locks. He puts on his helmet and thinks to himself that it's quite troublesome. The security of this place is more serious than he thought, looking at the passing knights. He thinks he can kill or knock them out, but the place will be a mess when the sun comes up. He leaves and says that it would be wiser to take your time getting out of the window and walking on the way here. A place caught his attention. People may not notice, but for him this is a problem, and the persistent smell of corpses in such a place. It passes to one of the buildings. They say he'll go down there first. The boss thinks that resting in a cold dungeon is good, but sometimes such a warm place isn't bad either. He's lying on the bed, and someone is scolding, and he says it doesn't look like they'll give him a moment's peace. Someone starts knocking and calling Sir Knight, asking if he's inside. The boss comes out and says he went out and had a night walk. And the man says that if that's the case, then let them come down and let him cook some food. He smiles and says that the innkeeper should not have a hungry customer. Besides, Russell Knights had given such a large sum of money, then he should repay it. He also says that they didn't tell each other his name, the new one, and the boss calls himself Deft. The owner of the courtyard says that it is good and hopes that he will not be disappointed with what he sees below, and that there is almost no food, so he prepared one and could not. He asks him if the situation is really that bad, and he says that, as the name suggests, it was a disaster, and the residents who saw it with their own eyes, for the most part, immediately lost consciousness. He put on a serious face and said that after the incident, the Lord committed suicide. And then, as you can see, the traffic in the part wasn't blocked. Outside, the castle walls are littered with the corpses of people who died of starvation and don't know why they came. But it's in their best interest to get out of here faster, and he'll be leaving soon, too. He looks at all the buildings and thinks about them as they descend. He says he should also know how people behave. When are they cornered? Then a little girl in tattered clothes and red hair climbs in. A girl with red hair is about to climb through the window. She lands on the floor and strikes a pose. She worries at the same time, smiles and says that's great. To think that invisibly outsiders are learning the situation of the village and can afford such a luxury. She looks at their beds and says that it's also the most expensive room in the hotel. And, most likely, they are very rich. I imagine a fat rich man. She gathers her hands into a fist and smiles, saying that she will only take what can have at least some value. Then she looks at the piece of clothing, surprised. She picks it up and says it's a garment, but a rag after all. And it's disgusting. She looks at it, and it stinks, and it covers its nose. She made a face. She thinks to herself, aren't they rich? After that, he takes it and goes ahead, saying that it will come down to wrap other valuables in it. She goes to the chest and opens it, and it turns out to be empty. And she talks about why there's nothing here. She starts to worry, says that this is bad and that they carry all their things with them. After that, she starts opening all the lockers in a row, and sees that they are empty. On opening one of them, she is surprised. He says they couldn't have done it all. After which, us looking at it starts to worry, calling it a misunderstanding. Then someone enters the room. It was Patrick, and he tells the boss that he came back and as he asked, quickly passed, stood in the Lord's castle. He asks him what he's up to this time while he's lying on the bed, and he replies that it's nothing like a teacher. He takes off his helmet and says that he just wanted to find out about the new city of these lands. The boss doesn't look at the ceiling in this, and Patrick says security is tougher than he thought. It was to no avail. He asks the boss if he has learned anything at all. The boss replies that he knows who he is asking this question to. And Patrick says he just wanted to keep up the conversation by sitting on the next bunk. The boss says that the city is cut off from the outside world and that even the innkeeper doesn't have any useful information. After that, Patrick is very surprised and says that he is mine. And the boss asks him what happened. And Patrick tells him that the fact that he decided to get out of bed on his own is very surprising. His eyes start to shine, and he goes up to it and tells it that it is the ancient one, cut off from the outer one. Tomorrow they will dig deeper. And the boss turned away from him, pressed against the pillow and says that let him do it himself. Patrick says, that is, together, yes, and then looks at the open windows and says that it would be even better if he learned to close the windows today, because when he left, he insisted on leaving one open, and now both are open. And God forbid that a burglar will show up again. After that, the boss is surprised to hear what he mumbles about, but he didn't even touch them. Patrick starts laughing and says that his excuse is more like a stupid joke and there was no draft, as it could have opened up. So the ghost came and threw them open. Then he says he doesn't know if someone had to open it, whether it was a burglar or a ghost. Then it hits them both. The boss starts looking around the bed and says that his cape is missing, because it is still there. Completed video. And Patrick goes through the lockers and says what's missing from him, too, and did he see what he put in the drawer. The boss asks him what's missing, and he was very scared and worried, answers him that his rib bones were missing. After that, we are shown how this girl with red hair starts to run away, taking it with her. She is very tired and looks at the bag and says that everything should be fine now. Men approach her, call her Rosalina. She was taken aback by this and very surprised. Behind this man, a couple more are standing and melting, says hey, where she went in the middle of the night. He is dressed in rags and has long brown hair. He tells her that I think he told her not to go out so late. She starts to worry and says that she left for a reason and she wanted to help everyone. He asks her what to do to help everyone. He starts yelling at her and points his finger, saying that if she wants to say that her futile outings and constant starvation is all the general help. And she tries to answer him that it is not just omitted, they will listen. And another man comes up to them and tells them not to push her. She shouts that it is the head, and he, frightened, says if he woke them up. He takes a chair and says that a thief should not be afraid of the dark. But the fact that she left without saying a word is really a duty. After that, she bit her lips, starts to worry, looking at the floor. And the head of that often says that it can be extremely dangerous on the street. Before acting independently, it was worth thinking about the risks. If she got hurt, everyone would be worried. He sits down in front of her and tells her that this place is very different from her old home. And here there is no discomfort or warmth. It's a man with a jacket and brown hair. He's sitting in front of her in huge shoes, and she tells him that she will remember it. The head replies that he hopes that she has understood everything and what she will do next. Then she tells them to wait and let them have a look at what she stole. And she shows the sheet and the rib bones. She says that, yes, she stole it and she wanted to help. He looks at it with anger, says, where did she get all this from? And she's sure they know about the place in the inn on Main Street. So she took these bones from the most expensive room, searched the entire room, and found them in a hidden drawer. And she is sure that this is a very expensive artifact. I get down on my knees and show you all the things we need. He puts his hands on his head and says, and that these are human bones. Show it to me or it'll prove it. She starts yelling that even though he's always asking if it's serious and she didn't know, it's her swearing that she didn't know when she was scared. And the man next to her asks if she has, too, worried if she has desecrated graves, and shouts to him that there is nothing like this. And he tells her that she couldn't have taken these bones from the cemetery with one of her ribs, and if she really did, she wouldn't have dared to show them to him. Tak says that's right, she wouldn't dare. He looks at them and says that it must be someone's terrible hobby, or they use these bones for some kind of ritual, trying to look at them. The man replied that there are people who collect human bones. The head replies that there are perverts who, after chopping off the limbs of their slaves, make jewelry out of them and start to worry. And then there is no way to find out if this bone belonged to a person or someone who was there. And he thinks to himself, if he has robbed necromancers or those who practice dark magic, the situation may be even more dangerous. After that, it is covered with a black aura of fear. Looking at this bone that starts to shine blue, he thinks to himself that this is very strange, because the cape in which she brought it to him looks like it was worn by a beggar, although it is made of very high-quality material. Lifting it up, he is surprised and says why didn't she check her pockets. He looks there and sees gold coins. And how many are there? Another man says that with all this money. But the head gets up and says that now is not the time for fools to fantasize. And what bad guys they are, because they are really hard to find. Other people come up to him and tell him that they didn't come just in time. And the head thinks to himself that these people have stopped. The most expensive hotels in an almost ruined village should have been guessed earlier. The man says it looks like his precious cape. Here he turns to them and thinks to himself that human bones and clothing are made of very expensive material, and they crossed the road of the wrong people. And the boss and Patrick were standing in front of them, and they were saying hello to the thieving, and they came to get their stuff back. And then the head says that Val he was looking forward to and waiting for, looking at Patrick or the boss, and it seems that all things are intact. And the boss sighs, says that the cape is intact, and Patrick says the cape was a gift from Renee. If he puts a hole in Renee's heart again, remembering how angry she can be, there's no telling what will happen, so it's just as well. Starting to tremble with fear. And in any case, that's why the head is telling everyone to stand back. They are surprised by this, and the boss says that he is their leader. And I get worried and ask them how they found them. Patrick must have called out to Sinner for his master. Boss says he is tired and let's go back and rest soon. Patrick looks at his yawning boss and thinks to himself that he's only going to be able to restrain himself today, since he's been going back and forth so much. He points to the chapter and says that Dark Alley is after this item and still isn't going to give it back in a nice way. And he says whether there is any guarantee that he will just take it and leave it if he returns it. And Patrick says if you think about it that way, he's right. He thinks to himself that something is wrong here. And even with the girl insisting on footprints, they found us in the dark very quickly, and it's impossible. Unless they are monsters of some kind, and can it be that it's dark magic? And the girl continues to hold these ribs. The head asks her if they are the ones who live in the dark, and Patrick replies that the cave is quite dark. He thinks to himself that they must be dark magic. And the head keeps saying that this is a reference bone. It seems to be very important for him. And he says that of course, because it is a part of his body. He smiles, because what comes out is also a part of the body. No, this is his part of the body, and let him stop stalling and return everything. Then he throws up some ribs, and Patrick is surprised by it. The head of the girls shouts at the others to retreat with the people who can't walk, after which Patrick runs to catch his ribs, shouting that they are his. He catches them, and the man in the shadows tries to hit him. He breaks his helmet with his weapon, and he says that it hurts. He turns abruptly and looks at the man, who thinks to himself that he didn't do any damage. For C continues to yawn. He says it was just a rock, and it looks like it's all snot. Then one of the other robbers tries to hit him from behind, and his dagger breaks, and his body, and he takes it by the neck and lifts it up, saying that it looks like they have decent weapons. And what should he do about it? After that, Patrick says that he thinks about stopping this performance. This thug is trying to flutter around and tells everyone not to do anything. And Patrick is talking about how about we knock everyone out. And the boss asks him if he wants to spare them. and Patrick says he doesn't want to let them live, but rather give each of them a good hard time. Ebo says he doesn't care, because he's so tired that he's not even sure if he can control the force properly. Patrick then takes the man and puts him on the floor, and they think about what, but it's worth a try. He asks about the demoness, how he thinks the master is doing. If everything is fine, says that, of course, and Renee goes on to say that it's been half a day since he left. And the demon queen, very surprised. This is my says that exactly that only half a day has passed. Renee goes on to say that nothing bad could have happened to the master, and she is not sure that this is the right thing to do. Just the two of us sitting here enjoying a relaxing break. And especially when the master might starve to death there. To which she is told that come on, there is no leader. You think too much and there is at least one reason why such a wonderful person will skip lunch. Thinking to herself that how many times she had already mentioned it. She says she is right and she is too worried with both Mr. and Patrick. They're just a human village, they can't get into any trouble, and she thinks to herself that he's had enough of her. The demon queen says that, of course, this is an ancient monster that rules everything and is responsible for the death of the Death Knights. Patrick stands and says it's more problematic than he thought, and the boss picks up his cape and smiles. He says that he was surprised that it was possible to confuse him for a moment, and he hoped that they would have a map with them, since they are thieves. But it looks like they're out of luck and it's best to get it over with. Yes, quickly. And he tells the boss, and at that point he's already in bed, and the boss tells him not to lie down and starts yelling at him. The boss says that he should also lie down everywhere with more comfort than he thinks. A girl comes up to them and apologizes, but she is very worried and says that she stole it. I apologize. She cries and shouts that the others have nothing to do with it, so she gets down on her knees and asks them to take her, but don't touch the others. Another man tells her to get up, because thinking that she is not so simple, they will be released. She keeps crying and saying that the head, and the man says they didn't even think about it. The boss looks at them, smiling, and tells them that they finally get it. And he asks Patrick to take care of it, and he says of course he will. After that, they see this oppressive atmosphere, and the man points a dagger, saying that if he comes closer, he will kill him, and he really will. The girl, in turn, takes the amulets and begins to pray. Patrick notices something about her. After that, it moves a lot. To the girl and tells her that where did she get this. Looking at her brooch, he thinks to himself that the phoenix-shaped ornaments are like an inverted cross, with a beak at the bottom and feathers at the top of the red hue, and the mana it drains from this surveillance magic. And the girl hesitates and answers him, and at that moment he thinks about why to set up surveillance on the inhabitants of the slums. He shouts to the boss that someone is spying on them. He takes it and it tells him not to get dusty, and Patrick says that as soon as this young lady started praying on the cross, there were signs of surveillance magic. This means that it is activated under special conditions. If they find out, in some ways they will be able to understand what the person who gave her this cross was up to. After that, the boss thought about it and said that this city is not known for magic and first the magic stone. Now the subject of its incarceration is magic. Patrick says that he will try to convince people to cooperate with us, so he should try too. Night. And he again, in turn, sprawled on the floor and says that how is he going to convince them in this situation. Patrick thinks about it and says that, of course, there is a great idea in this skull, poking his finger on the head. Patrick says that he apologizes for what happened, and it has nothing to do with their theft. Then one of the men looks up and they look very tired. Patrick tells us that the whole point is that they have received Imperial orders to get rid of anyone with whom they have any disagreement. I was standing near a girl and a man, and the man was asking for an Imperial order. So they and Patrick interrupts him by saying that they are from organizations that directly follow orders from the government. The Shadow Knights of Roan's Mist. The man is surprised by this and asks, Shadow Knights. The girl is also shocked. Patrick says that's right. We don't have any bad intentions towards them, so they can relax. One of the passers-by asks why they came to their village, Sir Knight, and he says it's to help this city. I think the reason he's going against the Imperial order is to save their lives, and he also needs information that you can provide. And he must find out and analyze the situation in the village as quickly as possible, so that he can send people and necessary supplies. The head is very thoughtful about this and looks at Patrick seriously. He tells them that let's rebuild the city together, and he needs their help. Passers-by say that they are Imperial Knights, since he said that he came to help. Passers-by begin to wonder about this and discuss it, saying that His Majesty did not abandon them. They say that let's help Sir Knight and finally get the drovers out of this life. Patrick says he thinks he's managed to make sure that people were always easy to deal with, and the lower classes are so accepting of the opportunities they provide. The boss talks about what it means when they come back, and Patrick sees that, of course, no, it's just getting started, and there's a lot of weird stuff going on here. Boss glares at Patrick and thinks to himself that he appreciates his efforts, but the quality of the problem has only gotten bigger. He only made this situation more tedious. And he tells him what they meant, say 3 enemies. And Patrick asks him what he's mumbling, and he turns away from him and says, nothing like that. Patrick says that in any case, he should stand up and not lie on the road, and given the current situation, it is necessary that he act, gesturing for him to get up. The boss looks at him and says that he is a bit strange today. Maybe he can sort it out on his own, which makes Patrick angry and say if he's serious. He says that he will keep an eye on the head of all of them. He is the most suspicious, looking at the crowd of people discussing, and they, in turn, should try to get close to the villagers. After that, the boss was very surprised and scared, saying that he was really asking him to get closer to people. And Patrick, beaming, says that he has no choice, and between the knight in plate armor and the boss looks like beggars, who do you think will be easier to meet in confidence? And he says, did he call him a beggar boss? And Patrick says it's just an educated guess to make sure that just getting close enough to them by the time he gets back, and let him try to be like them. He does the same thing they do. After that, the boss was very surprised and thinks to himself that how to do it is the same as people. First, they spend most of the day sleeping, and when they are awake, they feel very tired and irritable, which is why they start working at random. And he doesn't think they have any motivation in the morning. But if that's the case, he starts to smile and say that he just has to act normal. And Patrick is very surprised and says that they know how he came to this conclusion. But it won't be so easy. Besides, he looks at him and says that they need to find out about the religion spread by her and don't forget about it. In other words, it asks him to find out all the information of these people, and the sooner they don't finish, the sooner they will go home, right? After that, the boss is worried and says that he understood everything. And Patrick says that just in case, he should try to stay calm, even if people are a little rude to him. And he turns away from him. They say there that getting close to people will be oh so difficult. After which, passers-by ask the knights, is he really a member of the Roan Mist? They smile and say that since he is one of the knights of the Imperial Court, he came from the capital, and is this true? And is it true that the capital is a place where there is a stall with milk and honey on every corner? Another passerby asks him, is it really a knight, and why is his partner all armor, and the other is dressed in ordinary clothes? After that, the boss says that he is a fool, and this disguise, and whether he would always wear such a thing, after which he is told that it is clear, after which he is asked when they will be. Call him the Grey Knight. The boss thinks to himself, why aren't they so clingy? You can't even breathe here. He gets angry and doesn't know what to do, and if he had any other choice, he would just eat everyone. I remember what Patrick said about being friendly, and the boss takes out one of the kids and gets really annoyed. He smiles at the child to think to himself, which is true. He needs to get close to them and needs to be friendly. He asks the little boy what he is interested in, and the bright-eyed boy asks him if they have ever met Sir Vern or Lady Voyne. After which, he says that he doesn't even know who they are, even though the names sound somewhat familiar. Rosaria approaches him and tells Sir Knight that these are his things, and she apologizes for stealing them. At this point, another man dispersed all the residents and returned to their homes. And the boss scratches his head and says that everything is fine, and the main thing is that they found them. The man introduces himself to Thoth, and he replaces the head while he is away, and he has instructed him to fulfill all his requests. He tells him that he came here to save the city, and he answers, right. He says that if he wants to know what the situation of the village is, it will be better to see everything with his own eyes. If he doesn't mind, he shows it right now, and then the boss thinks to himself that he doesn't want it and why he decided to show it right now. He thinks to himself that if he stays here, he will continue to be pestered with questions, looking at the people who don't let him breathe. He agrees and says it's better to go now. The child next to him raises his hand up, smokes that it's time to go, and he goes around the city, and the man says let's see the residential area first. He asks him where all the people are and why is it so empty. Toot says you'll find out when they open this door, and then they go into one of the huts and see what's in there. They see people starving to death while looking at a couple lying together. And here, even the neighbors will not be able to steal food, because they do not have it either, and those who are alive do not know when they will die of hunger. The boss then wondered if they had starved to death. He was interested in something from the beginning. Usually when a village finds itself in such a situation, the anger of the people is directed at the Lord of the Lands. Remembering how the uprising takes place, citizens and the angry inhabitants rise up, raising their torches and pitchforks. And this disaster brought famine closer to the village. But why are the people of this city starving and not trying to rebel? Then he opens one of the windows. He says it's been more than a month since the Black Flight hit their land. Why is the village so quiet? All because people are trying to strike against the Lord. Isn't the boss curious about why they aren't on strike? Events are transferred to the cave. Renee and the demon are sitting at tables drinking tea. The demon says that she wanted to go together with the master. They just sit in the dungeon because it's very boring. Making a disgruntled face, Milieu lies on the table and says that she should not think so because the master has assigned them to guard the lair. And what could be more important than that? And she says it means she doesn't have the full confidence of the master. Then she thinks to herself that of course he trusts her, not Milieu. Thinking to myself that this damn cat is a thief. After that, she lay on the table, thinking. She smiles, says that this is how it is, I should have guessed it. She looks very happy. To which Renee sips tea and says that this way they won't know when people might come here. That the cat is a thief, you need to stay focused. To which he says so that Renee doesn't worry. She constantly checks the dungeon for enemies. And, by the way, it's already been 10 minutes since the last check and it's better to check the dungeon again. Turning despite the floor, creating a huge number of eyes all over the floor. This is the middle rank magic of the observer's eye. Renee says it's a good idea and then she'll go clean up. I use this magic, looks and wonders. They say that you will mention the devil, someone invaded the dungeon. Using his magic everywhere, watching everything, and since the watcher's eyes don't twitch, the invader is probably alone. To which he says so that she gets ready, getting up from the table and she is surprised. As it approaches, a huge number of red auras appear from the passageway and they are ready to fight. The person who appeared says that why are they so tense? And Renee is surprised, and Vladika asks her what's wrong. Elizabeth appears in front of them and tells them how they are doing. She is wearing a black dress and has red hair with red eyes and red lips. Elizabeth Bathory is the mistress of the great dungeon of evil's Shite Castle. Red bats are flying in the sky, and she says she's sorry, that's all. And she didn't announce her visit in advance, and she would have prepared something. To which Elizabeth tells her not to worry, and there is no need to worry so much. After all, she came without an invitation, and Renee gives her a cup of tea. She winks at her, smiles, and tells her that, however, she still wants to buy her something, and maybe she will do it with her own blood. Then says it's impossible. Elizabeth says it's sad, and who's the new girl? After which Milieu says that she really wants to know about her great one. She stands in front of everyone and points to herself with her hands, saying that if she insists on doing so, then the Demon Queen rules all monsters. 17. The successor of Asmodeus Milieu. To which Lena says that he forgot to introduce them. This is the mistress of Shite Castle, Lady Bathory. She is surprised by this, and Elizabeth looks at her and says that this is the young Demon Queen, and no wonder her aura is so interesting. Whereupon the Demon Queen comes up to her and whispers in her ear, worrying that she won't be able to see all the dungeon bosses if she lives here. To which the real one takes her cheeks with his hands and tells her that she really says such funny things, clearly showing her annoyance. And she lives here for the even harder to see truth, no conscience. Elizabeth smiles and says that if she's living off of it, then she's not part of the original core, and she's thinking about getting something to drink. So far, she says no, she doesn't live here yet. Bat standing nearby turns into an employee and pours, there is a glass of something red shade. To which Elizabeth asks where Patrick and the other guys are. To which she is told that they went out just for a moment, and she is surprised by this. She makes a serious face, says that they are absent at such a moment. Renee is surprised and says what happened. To which says that all the villages near the castle were completely destroyed, running his fingers over the glass. Apparently, all the people died, because there is just a sea of blood. But there were no bodies. And she doesn't think humans did it, because the trail of blood on the ground led in one direction, as if creating a path. And at the end of that road was Hasting. What does that mean? The main gate of Justin, and the fact that there is a bloody path leading to it. To which the demoness says that if all the bodies have disappeared, then it can be undead. Elizabeth Green, it's true that few people could do such a thing while sipping their glass. After all, basically the undead have no intelligence showing these corpses. However, there is a sentient that belongs to the highest species and has the special title of senior. This is an army of the dead moving together, meaning that someone has to command them. Show a lot of corpses going somewhere, and it could be the undead Lord Immortal King or Woes, and he is the most obvious candidate. After that, they are surprised by this and start to worry. Elizabeth says she doesn't have any concrete proof, but she needs to notify the other guy because there are monsters that can transmit messages. To which the real one is very shy and says that no dungeon is currently empty. Elizabeth says that they must have some kind of communication method, to which she is told that no, he believes in the master's decision, showing her confidence, to which she thinks to herself that it is a poor thing to believe in such a person. And Patrick, will he come up with something? The Demon King says that he is worried and someone should let him know, after which she gets up and asks her what she is doing. To which she says that she probably decided to do the greatest thing. She shows with all her appearance that she wants to help them. Events are transferred to the boss in Thoth buildings. The Black Calamity was the beginning of all this. Shortly after it hit the city, someone set fire to the fields. Due to the rapid spread of the fire, the harvest ready for harvest turned to ashes. And it was also at this time that bad rumors began to spread, showing how all the fields near the mill were on fire. They said that the entire crop of the area that was affected by the Black Calamity was completely polluted. And as soon as you put it in your mouth, you will start to feel incredible pain. That's how the city turned into a cursed land. And when word began to spread that even the emperor had given up the city, people became desperate. The boss listened seriously to this, and the boss goes on to say that even in this desperation there was a drop of hope. A well-to-do couple, a commoner, took the responsibility, and fortunately, they still had a lot of crops that were not damaged by the fire. They opened their warehouses and distributed supplies to the villagers, showing how they gave all their supplies to people. And around this couple, a group of people began to form who wanted to work together to survive. Only when everyone starts relying on them do you believe them. They were found dead in their own home. It shows a man stabbing them to death. And it was someone hungry for more food and apparently killed them. After that, no one trusts anyone. Since then, everyone is on their own. Everyone is just fighting for the leftovers in the hope of living at least another day. They live in dark alleys, managed to survive thanks to rumors of poisoning of the crop. To which the boss says that it means that this crop can be eaten despite gossip. But what does the man say so far? And the boss thinks to himself that there's no way a crop that he didn't even touch could have become poison, and someone was spreading these rumors with bad intent. The man says that now we need to go further. Then the knights near the castle notice what is there. At first, they all thought that they would quickly overcome this calamity. And here are the results of their overconfidence. Looking at the huge number of corpses. And as insects started to gather in the streets because of the corpse, they started digging holes and piling them up like this. The boss asked him why they didn't burn them. To which he says that those who have lost their loved ones still cannot let them go, and in fact just no one wants to take on such a troublesome job. He asks him if he can do it. And he says he didn't mention it. But the murdered couple had a daughter. He asks what's wrong with her. And he says he means that her parents are also somewhere in this pile. The bottom line says that he understood. He asks why those soldiers are always on guard, looking at them near the entrance. To which he says that yes, they guard there in shifts, and they are not exactly protecting, but rather just controlling. He thinks to himself that they are watching the gate in such a situation, and they must be following the Lord's orders. And he thinks about how the Lord is very suspicious. And in such situations, there is no better way than to meet him in person. After which, Patrick sits on one of the Lord's buildings, and he says that they can't understand his hidden intentions by conventional methods. Patrick then takes out the egg and says that he didn't steal the harpy's egg for nothing. The harpies will surely come for him, and he gets rid of them and gets a formal reception from the Lord. He taps his head and says it's a brilliant plan and he must be a genius. But he lowers his head and says that was the original plan and the devil. He didn't expect that there would be so many of them. Looking at the huge number of enraged harpies flying towards him, some say no, this can't be happening. The girl says it's her brother who hanged himself. She has white hair and is standing with a candle. She's watching his brother hang himself and hanging on. The last words are spoken by her name Lala. Is she saying that she has to survive? Then she approaches his face and is surprised. She listens as he tells her what she would remember and should survive. So shout wake up to bed. She breathes heavily and puts her hand on the sample. One of the servants asks Meredith if she has had another nightmare. She's breathing hard, and he smiles and says no, it's nothing. Lord of Justine Lalasinvir Edark. He asks her if she wants to get some more sleep, to which he says no, she'd better go get some fresh air. Then she gets out of bed, goes out on the balcony, and thinks to herself that it's been a few weeks since she took up this position. I still remember the day her brother died. Relatives have fled with the family's funds, and Hastings is still reeling. She looks at the whole made in her city and thinks that in this situation, she has only one way to survive. She looks at the city and says the only way is to restore it. She sits on the throne and says that she was promised salvation. In front of the man who knelt before her, and he was covered in robes of blue and red hue. She tells him that he said he would protect her and her land. He agrees with him. She shouts and points to the window, telling him to look at the street, and this is for your salvation. The man says that he did not break his promise, and soon he will settle all the problems that the residents of the city faced, so she should not worry about it. She looks at him and says that this man has never revealed the details of his plans, but also at present, he has no choice but to trust him. This man says that everything is going according to plan, so die or just continue to live your cozy life. He smiles and says that soon all the problems will disappear. She touches her face, closes her eyes, and says that it's fine if she believes him and waits. After that, one of the court servants goes inside and asks the lady what she should report regarding the safety of the city. She asks what it is, and she replies that Soot reported that the village was attacked by 100 and Harpy, but a knight who suddenly appeared was able to repel their attack with one powerful blow. She was very surprised by this, asking that who is he and why was he able to do it in one hit? Which order does it belong to? She replies that the North Gate guard asked these questions in response, only getting silence. Kak says it's good, and she'll ask herself where this recipe is now. And lying, she says that she took him to the guest room. To which the man pays attention and tells Milady to please reconsider her decision. And we can't rule out the possibility that he might be a masked killer. She says that the fact that he is suspicious doesn't negate his actions for the good of the village, and as the lord of the city, she should reward him for such heroism. Yana says to bring this knight to her, whereupon Patrick comes and bows and says that the knight-errant greets the Vord. He is very tired, but he has come a long way to reach these lands, but after seeing such a noble lady, he realized that the road was not passed in vain. She, in turn, says that she was told that thanks to his courage and bravery, the city did not suffer. That she expresses gratitude on behalf of all the villagers. The man in the hoodie and her husband are standing next to her. Intercede tells her that it is an honor for him, but at this point he thinks that she does not fit the image of the stereotypical lord. And judging by her age, this is the younger sister of the previous word. Diana asks him what kind of family he belongs to which he is silent. She asks him what his name is, and he says he is forced to grieve, but he can't tell her his name and asks for her understanding. To which she is surprised, says that this is how much he hides, and she expects that he will refuse if she asks to remove the helmet. To which Patrick says that his face is disfigured by battle scars. The skin on the right side is missing altogether, creating not the best look. But if the lady wishes, he can take it off. And Ward tells him to forget and get to the Devil's Core. She says that maybe she doesn't have much, but she would still like to reward him, not ask if he needs anything. To which he says that yes, he would be happy to eat. He thinks to himself that the most important thing for Justine right now is food, and he will be able to find out the current position of the castle from her answer. To which she says that this is not a problem and asks to grant his request. To which the bitch bows to say that she obeys, and Patrick says that he is very grateful. He is surprised that she answered without even thinking, and goes to the castles. There is no problem with food. So why did the lady leave her own village to starve? Remembering the sea of corpses. And besides, it's an energy that can only be felt when you're undead. He looks at the hooded man and says that this man exudes a familiar aura. And Patrick asks her. She agrees that he can ask her, and he says that he has something bothering him for a while. And he turns to this man in a hoodie and asks who he is. After which he tells this to the boss in the backwater, saying that's what happened, the locks. And the boss asks about the fact that the lady just sat there, did nothing. And he says that when he said that he only asked out of curiosity, she let him go and even marvels at how easy it was. The boss asks him that he felt a familiar aura from him, but he wasn't an undead, so he just left him alone. Patrick says that whether he expected him to start fighting him right there, and to have him pick up a familiar aura doesn't mean not to live. And he says that necromancers can also cause such feelings. People who use black magic release approximately similar energy to the undead, remembering what they look like. And the boss makes a face and says that he takes the time to check each person, and in your place, he would just get rid of them. To which Patrick becomes angry and says that they came to the city to clean up the mess he made, and not to create even bigger problems. And does he really want him to quit? But that the boss turns around and starts apologizing. After that, he asks Chris to forget about the situation and asks him if he found out anything. The boss says that, yes, people seem to think that all the food in the village is contaminated, and he was wondering why everything is so quiet. And, apparently, the residents simply refused. They ate poisoned food and began to starve to death. Ida, the thief who stole his ribs with his roe, has become close to her and is very difficult as she is constantly running away. It would be great to have mind control magic, and it's possible to explore Take a Mile. He remembers her and says that this is after he brought a man who initially did not want to go and get angry. To which Patrick says that they don't have any other options anyway, and he should take a look at the food that was handed to the lady, showing the bag. And the boss looks at him and says that he really wants to eat before discussing everything. The boss shows that he doesn't and says that let's try to win Rosary's trust.